New Orleans, with its vibrant culture and rich history, has long been a city filled with intrigue. The French Quarter, in particular, stands as a testament to centuries of human experience, both glorious and grim. Amidst the colorful streets and lively jazz clubs, there exists a house unlike any other, the infamous Villari Mansion. Its elegant facade hides a story steeped in tragedy, suffering, and a legacy that has haunted the city for nearly 2 centuries. Madame Delphine Lalaurie, born Marie Delphine McCarty in 1787, grew up in a world of privilege. She was part of New Orleans high society, and from an early age, she understood the importance of appearances. Her beauty, charm, and social standing made her one of the most admired women in the city. She was married 3 times, each union increasing her wealth and status. But it was her 3rd marriage to Dr. Leonard Louis Lalaurie that would cement her place in the city's dark history. The couple resided at 1140 Royal Street, a grand mansion in the heart of the French Quarter. The house, with its tall windows, iron lace balconies, and stately appearance, was the perfect setting for Delphine's lavish social gatherings. To the outside world, she was the epitome of refinement, hosting elegant parties that attracted the city's elite. Guests marveled at her grace, her wealth, and the beauty of her home. Yet, behind this polished exterior, something far more sinister was happening within the walls of the mansion. From the early days of her residency, rumors swirled about Madame Lalaurie's treatment of those enslaved in her household. While many wealthy families in New Orleans kept enslaved workers, there was something unsettling about the way Delphine interacted with them. Neighbors noticed strange, disturbing incidents, people whispering about how her staff seemed to disappear, never to be seen again. It was said that Madame Lalaurie had an uncharacteristically cold and distant demeanor towards them, a stark contrast to the warmth she showed her high society peers. One story that circulated involved a young girl who had worked in the house. She had been seen brushing Delphine's hair on the balcony one afternoon. Allegedly, the girl made a mistake, tugging too hard at a tangle. Madame Lalaurie, enraged, chased her through the house and onto the rooftop. The young girl, in her fear, leapt to escape Delphine's wrath, falling to her tragic end. It was an incident that should have triggered public outrage, but instead, it was quietly covered up, thanks to Lalaurie's wealth and influence. Over time, other accounts began to emerge. Some spoke of faint cries coming from the mansion late at night, while others claimed they saw strange figures peering from the windows as if pleading for help. Still, Madame Lalaurie's social standing remained intact. Wealth, power, and status allowed her to hide the unspeakable acts that were happening within her home. Dr. Lalaurie, a man of medicine, seemed indifferent to his wife's behavior. Though he was present in the mansion, he often absented himself from the household affairs, spending more time in his practice or indulging in the social privileges of the era. While his presence could have been a moderating influence on his wife, there were rumors that he too turned a blind eye to the growing darkness within their home. Madame Lalaurie was careful, ensuring that her public image remained flawless. She continued to host elaborate parties, where the most influential people in New Orleans would gather in her grand ballroom, sipping fine wine, unaware or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge the sinister reality hidden behind the mansion's closed doors. Yet the cracks in this perfect facade were growing harder to ignore. People began whispering more openly about her cruelty. But it wasn't until a tragic event in 1834 that the full extent of the horror within the mansion would be revealed. An accident in the kitchen, a fire that quickly spread, would bring everything to light. As the fire raged through the lower levels of the mansion, passersby rushed to help. It was during this chaos that the full truth of Delphine Lalaurie's life came to the surface. The firefighters who responded to the blaze discovered something unimaginable, an attic full of unspeakable suffering. This discovery would forever change the legacy of the Lalaurie mansion. Madame Lalaurie, once admired for her beauty and charm, was now reviled. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of wealth and elegance, would forever be stained by the horrors that had occurred within its walls. The building itself seemed to absorb the cruelty, its once pristine appearance now a reminder of the darkness that lingered there. After the fire, the truth spread rapidly through the city. The socialite, once revered, was now despised. Crowds gathered in outrage outside her mansion, demanding justice for the atrocities discovered within. But before they could take any action, Delphine Lalaurie vanished, slipping away into the night, never to face justice for her actions. She fled New Orleans, leaving behind a legacy of cruelty that would forever haunt the city. The Lalaurie mansion, scarred by its history, was left to stand as a reminder of the dark deeds that had taken place within. Over the years, it would be sold and resold, with each new owner finding themselves unable to live comfortably within its walls. The mansion had become something more than just a house. It had become a symbol of the city's most tragic chapter, a place where the echoes of the past continued to linger. The events of April 10, 1834, marked a turning point for the city of New Orleans. A fire broke out in the kitchen of the Grand Lalaurie mansion, sending thick plumes of smoke into the sky. Neighbors rushed to help, fearing for the safety of Madame Delphine Lalaurie and her family. As they approached the house, what began as a simple act of concern quickly spiraled into a moment that would shock the city to its core. The fire, though dangerous, was not the main story. It was what the fire revealed that would leave an indelible scar on the history of New Orleans. As firefighters battled the flames, they discovered a locked room on the top floor, an attic that was previously hidden from view. Desperate cries from inside the house led them to force open the door. What they found would horrify even the most hardened among them. The attic was not merely a storage space, but a chamber of unimaginable suffering. Within its dark and claustrophobic walls, a group of enslaved people had been confined, their bodies weakened and scarred from prolonged mistreatment. The air inside the room was thick with the stench of neglect, and the conditions were far worse than anyone could have imagined. Many of them were in a state of malnourishment, with signs of severe physical harm. The most harrowing discovery, however, was the apparatuses and tools that had been used to inflict pain. The evidence of intentional harm was undeniable makeshift restraints, chains, and devices that had no place in a household. It became clear that this was not a result of simple mistreatment, but something far more deliberate and cruel. Witnesses described the scene in hushed tones for years to come. The trauma they encountered was so intense that many struggled to find words to fully capture what they had seen. Those who had previously dismissed rumors about Madame Lalaurie's behavior could no longer turn a blind eye. The truth had been laid bare, and it was more horrific than anyone could have imagined. Madame Lalaurie, once a celebrated socialite, had harbored a darker side that had remained hidden for far too long. As the fire raged below, she attempted to maintain her composure, denying any knowledge of the atrocities uncovered in her home. But the evidence was overwhelming, and word spread quickly through the city. The genteel mask that she had worn for years was shattered in an instant. As the news of the discovery reached the streets, a wave of outrage swept through New Orleans. People who had once attended Lalaurie's lavish parties were now among the crowds demanding justice. The story of her cruelty spread like wildfire, and soon a mob gathered outside the mansion, their anger palpable. They called for her to be held accountable, but Madame Lalaurie, ever calculating, managed to flee the scene before she could face the wrath of the public. In the days following the fire, the Lalaurie mansion became a symbol of horror, a place where unspeakable suffering had taken place. It was said that the cries of those who had been harmed could still be heard within its walls, echoing through the now abandoned house. The building itself seemed to take on a life of its own, as if it had absorbed the pain and anguish that had occurred within. The authorities launched an investigation, but the damage had already been done. The full extent of Madame Lalaury's actions could never be fully documented, as many of the enslaved people who had suffered under her care did not survive to tell their stories. For those who had been found alive, their recovery would be a long and painful process. The city grappled with the aftermath, struggling to come to terms with the fact that such cruelty had been happening right under their noses. Dr. Leonard Louis Lalaurie, her husband, had been absent during the fire, and there were conflicting reports about his involvement in the horrors that took place in the attic. Some claimed that he was complicit, turning a blind eye to his wife's actions, while others believed he was unaware of the full extent of her cruelty. Regardless of his role, the Lalaurie name was now synonymous with suffering, and both husband and wife vanished into obscurity, leaving behind only speculation about their fates. The city, meanwhile, had to contend with the aftermath. The mansion, now abandoned, stood as a reminder of the horrors that had taken place. Neighbors avoided the building, unwilling to go near the place that had become a symbol of such intense suffering. It was said that strange noises could be heard at night, faint whispers, the sound of footsteps and cries that seemed to echo through the empty rooms. Those who were brave enough to approach the mansion reported an overwhelming feeling of unease, as if the building itself was alive with the memories of what had occurred there. Over time, the Lalaurie mansion became more than just a physical structure. It became a dark legend, a story passed down through generations about the dangers of unchecked cruelty. The people of New Orleans, who had once celebrated the Lalaurie family, now spoke of them only in whispers, as if even mentioning their name might invite some dark force into their lives. For years after the fire, the mansion stood empty, its windows dark and its walls decaying. No one dared to live there, and it became a place of ghost stories and urban legends. People claimed to see figures in the windows, shadows that would disappear when approached, and lights that flickered at night, despite the house being uninhabited. As the years passed, the house became a site of fascination for those interested in the supernatural. Paranormal investigators, curious tourists, and even thrill-seekers flocked to the mansion, hoping to catch a glimpse of the ghosts that were said to haunt its halls. The house had taken on a life of its own, its dark history forever tied to the legend of Madame Lalaurie. But beneath the ghost stories and the sensational headlines, the true horror of the Lalaurie mansion remained rooted in the very real suffering of those who had been harmed there. Their voices, silenced for so long, were finally being heard, though only through the dark legacy of the building where they had lived and died. The Lalaurie mansion was no longer just a house. It was a testament to the horrors that humans could inflict upon one another. And though Madame Lalaurie had escaped justice in her lifetime, the echoes of her cruelty would continue to reverberate through the city of New Orleans for generations to come. When the Lalaurie mansion fell silent after the events of 1834, the once vibrant home now stood as a monument to human suffering. The horrors unearthed in the attic haunted the streets of New Orleans, and the city's residents grappled with the magnitude of what had occurred behind the mansion's elegant facade. Madame Delphine Lalaurie had vanished into the night, her name forever tarnished, but the scar she left behind remained deep and festering. In the weeks and months that followed the fire, rumors circulated about Madame Lalaurie's fate. Some believed she had fled to France, returning to the homeland of her ancestors to live out the rest of her days in exile. Others speculated that she had assumed a new identity and was hiding somewhere in the American South, far from the public eye. There were even whispers that she had met an untimely end, punished by some divine force for her unspeakable actions. But none of these rumors were ever confirmed. The truth about Delphine Lalaurie's final years remains one of the many mysteries surrounding her legacy. What was certain, however, was the immediate aftermath of the mansion itself. Once the flames were extinguished and the full extent of the suffering within its walls was revealed, the Lalaurie mansion became a place of infamy. The house, with its graceful architecture and prime location on Royal Street, should have been a coveted property, but its dark history cast a long shadow. No one wanted to live there. It was said that the very walls were tainted, that they had absorbed the cries of those who had suffered and could never be cleansed. The mansion stood empty for many years, its windows boarded up and its grand facade slowly deteriorating. Neighbors avoided walking past it, and the building became a source of superstitions. People claimed to hear strange noises coming from within the walls, muffled voices, eerie footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of sobbing. Even in the daylight, the mansion exuded an atmosphere of dread. It was as if the house itself was mourning the lives that had been lost within its walls. Over time, stories of a curse began to take hold. The house, some said, had been cursed by the souls of those who had suffered there. They believed that the spirits of the enslaved people who had endured unimaginable pain at the hands of Madame Laurie were still trapped within the mansion, unable to find peace. Visitors and passers-by reported seeing shadowy figures in the windows, even though the house was uninhabited. Others claimed to hear faint whispers, as if the spirits were crying out for justice that had never been delivered. As the legend of the curse grew, so did the mansion's reputation as a place of paranormal activity. In a city as steeped in supernatural lore as New Orleans, the Lalaurie mansion quickly became one of its most notorious haunted locations. It was said that those who dared to enter the house would feel an overwhelming sense of sorrow, a weight pressing down on them as they walked through its dark, empty halls. Some claimed to have seen the ghost of Madame Laurie herself, still wandering the mansion, forever bound to the place where she had caused so much suffering. Despite the fear that surrounded the mansion, it did not remain abandoned forever. The property changed hands several times over the years, with each new owner hoping to restore the building to its former glory. But no one stayed for long. Each time the house was sold, the new residents would quickly abandon it, citing strange occurrences and an oppressive, unsettling energy that made living there unbearable. Furniture would move on its own, doors would slam shut without warning, and cold spots would appear in rooms that had been warmed by the sun just moments before. The mansion seemed determined to drive away anyone who tried to make it their home. One of the most famous incidents occurred in the late 19th century, when the mansion was purchased by a wealthy businessman. Hoping to profit from the building's prime location, he turned the mansion into an apartment complex. But almost immediately, tenants began to report strange and disturbing experiences. Objects would disappear, only to reappear in bizarre places. Loud bangs and disembodied voices would wake them in the middle of the night. One tenant even claimed to have seen the ghostly figure of a woman dressed in an old-fashioned gown, standing at the foot of his bed. Needless to say, the apartment complex was not a success, and the building was once again abandoned. As the years passed, the mansion's reputation continued to grow. Stories of the hauntings attracted the attention of paranormal investigators, ghost hunters, and curious tourists alike. Some came hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural, while others were drawn by the dark history of Madame Laurie and the infamous attic where so much suffering had taken place. The mansion had become a macabre tourist attraction, a place where history and legend intertwined to create something both horrifying and fascinating. But beneath the sensational stories of hauntings and curses lay the true tragedy of the Lalaurie mansion, the suffering of those who had been harmed within its walls. Their voices, silenced by history, had been forgotten by many, overshadowed by the legend of the house itself. Yet the presence of their spirits, whether real or imagined, served as a reminder that the true horror of the Lalaurie mansion was not in the ghost stories, but in the very real human cruelty that had taken place there. In the decades after Madame Laurie's departure, the mansion became a symbol of the darker aspects of human nature. It was a reminder that even in the most beautiful places, there can be darkness hidden beneath the surface. The curse of the Lalaurie mansion, it seemed, was not just a supernatural affliction, but a reflection of the deep scars left by the cruelty that had been inflicted there. As the years turned into decades and then centuries, the Lalaurie mansion remained a focal point of intrigue and fear. Each new owner, whether skeptical or superstitious, could not escape the house's dark history. The building itself seemed to resist any attempt to erase its past, as if the very stones had absorbed the horror of what had taken place. And so, the legend of the Lalaurie mansion continued to grow, its place in the annals of New Orleans' haunted history cemented forever. Though the mansion still stands today, restored and preserved, it remains shrouded in mystery. Many believe that the spirits of those who suffered there are still trapped within its walls, unable to move on. The building's grand appearance belies the darkness that lingers inside, a reminder that some wounds can never truly heal, and some stories are too tragic to forget. As the years passed and the events of 1834 faded from living memory, the Lalaurie mansion slowly transitioned from a house of horrors to a site of fascination for those drawn to the mysterious and unexplained. New Orleans, a city already known for its deep connection to the supernatural, found in the Lalaurie mansion one of its most infamous landmarks. The mansion's dark history, entwined with tales of tragedy and cruelty, made it a magnet for ghost hunters, paranormal enthusiasts, and curious visitors from around the world. By the early 20th century, the mansion had changed hands numerous times, with each owner attempting, and inevitably failing, to restore the building to its former grandeur. The house, beautiful though it was, carried an unmistakable aura, an energy that made even the bravest of souls uneasy. Many owners found themselves facing more than just the challenge of restoring a historic property. They faced the mansion's reputation, and for some, the belief that the house was haunted proved to be too much. For decades, people reported strange happenings in and around the mansion. From unexplained noises to mysterious apparitions, the stories that emerged from the Lalaurie mansion seemed to confirm what many had long suspected, that the house had never truly been free of its tragic past. Reports of ghostly figures roaming the halls were common, and visitors often claimed to feel a deep, oppressive presence when they entered the house. One of the most frequently reported phenomena was the sighting of a woman believed to be Madame Delphine Lalaurie herself. Dressed in a period gown, her figure was said to appear suddenly in various parts of the mansion, sometimes near the grand staircase, other times in the ballroom where she once entertained New Orleans' elite. Her presence, many believed, was not a comforting one. Those who claimed to have seen her often described an overwhelming sense of dread, as if they were in the presence of someone capable of unspeakable acts. Some visitors even reported feeling an inexplicable coldness whenever they approached the area where her ghost was said to appear. But it wasn't just Madame Lalaurie who was believed to haunt the mansion. Many believed that the spirits of the enslaved people who had suffered under her cruel hand were also still trapped within the walls of the house. The attic, where the most horrifying discoveries had been made, was the site of numerous paranormal experiences. Visitors reported hearing faint cries and whispers, as if the spirits of those who had endured so much pain were still calling out for help. Some even claimed to feel invisible hands brushing against them or pulling at their clothing, as though the spirits were trying to make contact with the living. Despite the growing number of paranormal reports, the Lalaurie mansion continued to attract attention. Its status as one of the most haunted locations in New Orleans only increased its allure. Television shows, books, and documentaries exploring the mansion's dark past and ghostly activity brought even more attention to the already infamous house. Paranormal investigators flocked to the site, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. Some claimed to have recorded strange voices on their equipment, disembodied voices that seemed to cry out in pain or confusion. Others took photographs that showed unexplained shadows or eerie orbs of light hovering in the air. Over time, the Lalaurie Mansion became not just a place where history had been made, but a key location in the folklore of the city. Locals and tourists alike whispered about the house, trading stories of their own eerie encounters or tales they had heard from friends and family. The mansion had become more than just a physical building. It was a living legend, a place where the boundary between the past and the present, between the living and the dead, seemed to blur. For many, the mansion represented the darker side of New Orleans history. While the city was known for its vibrant culture, music, and festivals, the Lalaurie Mansion was a reminder that even the most beautiful places could hold dark secrets. The house, with its elegant architecture and prime location in the French Quarter, was a symbol of the extremes of wealth and power that had once defined New Orleans society. Yet beneath its beauty lay a history of cruelty, one that could never be fully erased. As paranormal activity around the mansion grew more notorious, so did the house's reputation as a dangerous place. Visitors who entered the mansion often described feelings of nausea, dizziness, or overwhelming sadness. Some even claimed that the mansion had a malevolent energy, that the spirits within were not simply restless, but angry, perhaps vengeful. Over the years, more extreme accounts emerged. People reported being physically harmed while inside the house, scratches appearing on their arms or legs, or even being shoved by unseen forces. These incidents only added to the legend of the mansion, making it seem like a place where the past continued to assert its power over the present. By the mid-20th century, the Lalaurie Mansion had become a fixture in New Orleans ghost tours. Guides would lead groups past the house, recounting its grisly history and the terrifying encounters that had taken place within. For many tourists, the Lalaurie Mansion was the highlight of their trip, an opportunity to get as close as possible to one of the most haunted locations in America. The house became an essential stop for anyone interested in the supernatural, and its dark reputation only grew with time. Yet for all the stories of hauntings and ghosts, there was also a deeper legacy at play. The Lalaurie Mansion, with its history of suffering, forced the city to confront a part of its past that was often overlooked. The cruelty inflicted upon the enslaved people who lived and worked in the mansion was not just an isolated incident, but part of a larger, darker history that had shaped New Orleans and the American South. The house, haunted though it may be, stood as a reminder of the human cost of greed, cruelty, and unchecked power. In recent years, the mansion has once again been restored, with new owners taking great care to preserve its historical significance. Yet despite the renovations, the aura of the house remains unchanged. Visitors continue to report strange occurrences, and the mansion's reputation as a haunted house remains as strong as ever. For many, the Lalaurie Mansion will always be more than just a historic building. It will remain a place where the past refuses to stay buried, where the spirits of those who suffered continue to make their presence known. Whether the Lalaurie Mansion is truly haunted or whether its reputation is the result of centuries of storytelling and fear, one thing is certain: the legacy of the house is deeply intertwined with the history of New Orleans. It is a place where the weight of the past is felt in every corner, where the walls seem to whisper of forgotten tragedies, and where the line between the living and the dead is as thin as the fog that often rolls in from the Mississippi River. In the 21st century, the Lalaurie Mansion stands as a paradox, a symbol of both history and legend, fact and myth, beauty and horror. The world may have moved on from the events of 1834, but the mansion itself remains a physical embodiment of those dark days, forever linked to its infamous past. Despite the modern renovations and the shifting landscape of New Orleans, the mansion continues to capture the public's imagination like few other places in America. Today, the Lalaurie Mansion is not just a historical landmark. It has become a cornerstone of popular culture, a setting for numerous films, television shows, and books, all exploring the darker corners of the human psyche. Whether portrayed in dramas, thrillers, or supernatural tales, the mansion's story is retold time and time again, each version adding a new layer to its already complex mythology. One of the most notable examples of this is its inclusion in American horror stories, where the mansion's history is fictionalized and reimagined for modern audiences, though always with an air of eerie realism that echoes the true horrors of its past. The fascination with the Lalaurie Mansion extends far beyond the borders of New Orleans. Ghost tours and paranormal investigations have been featured in documentaries and online content, drawing viewers who are captivated by the idea of a real-life haunted house. Every year, thousands of tourists flock to the city, eager to catch a glimpse of the place where history and the supernatural intertwine. Standing in front of the mansion's elegant facade, it's easy to forget that behind those walls, untold pain once occurred. And that's exactly what makes it so enticing for those intrigued by the macabre. For some, the Lalaurie Mansion is more than just a tourist attraction. It's a portal into the mysteries of the afterlife. Paranormal investigators have spent years documenting their findings, hoping to provide proof of what so many have claimed to experience firsthand. Some investigators enter the mansion armed with cutting-edge technology, thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and voice recorders designed to capture sounds inaudible to the human ear. What they find often defies explanation. Shadows dart across empty rooms. Temperatures drop inexplicably, and strange, disembodied voices are captured on audio. Some investigators have even reported feeling physically touched by unseen hands, reinforcing the belief that the mansion is more than just haunted. It's alive with an otherworldly energy. Despite the numerous investigations, there has never been definitive proof that the mansion is haunted. Skeptics argue that the stories surrounding the house are nothing more than folklore, exaggerated by decades of retellings and the city's love for ghost stories. But for every skeptic, there is someone who has experienced something unexplainable, something that suggests that the mansion's dark. History has left an indelible mark on the present. One of the most perplexing mysteries surrounding the Lalaurie Mansion is the fate of Madame Delphine Lalaurie herself. While the general consensus is that she fled New Orleans after the fire, her exact whereabouts after her escape remains shrouded in mystery. Some believe she fled to France, living out her final years in anonymity, while others claim she never left Louisiana at all. There are even rumors that she returned to New Orleans in secret, blending into the city's society under a false identity. Although many have searched for definitive answers, none have been found, leaving her ultimate fate one of the mansion's most enduring mysteries. As for the mansion itself, its future seems just as uncertain as its past. Despite its renovations and modern use, there remains an undeniable sense that the house is still tied to the past, as though it cannot escape the horrors that once occurred within its walls. Those who live near the mansion often report strange happenings, lights flickering in the windows, unexplained sounds late at night, and an unsettling feeling that they are being watched. Even after all these years, the mansion continues to captivate and terrify in equal measure. The people of New Orleans, long accustomed to the city's rich tapestry of supernatural tales, often treat the Lalaurie Mansion with a mixture of reverence and fear. For some, it's simply part of the city's history, a tragic chapter that reflects the darker aspects of humanity. For others, it's a warning, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and cruelty. And for many, it's a place to avoid altogether, a site too steeped in sorrow and suffering to be approached lightly. Yet for all the terror associated with the mansion, it has also become a place of reflection. In recent years, more attention has been paid to the true victims of the Lalaurie Mansion, the enslaved men, women, and children who suffered at the hands of Madame Lalaurie. Their stories, long overshadowed by the legend of the mansion itself, are slowly being brought to the forefront. Exhibits and historical tours now make a concerted effort to honor the lives that were lost and to tell the fuller, more nuanced story of the mansion's past. In many ways, the Lalaurie Mansion has come to represent the complexity of New Orleans itself, a city where beauty and tragedy often go hand in hand, and where the weight of history is felt in every corner. The mansion, with its grand architecture and dark legacy, stands as a testament to the city's resilience, but also as a reminder of the cruelty and suffering that once lurked behind its closed doors. It is both a symbol of the horrors of the past and a cautionary tale about the dangers of forgetting history. Even as the mansion continues to evolve, whether as a private residence, a tourist destination, or a historical landmark, it remains a place of unanswered questions. Is it truly haunted? Will the spirits that are said to inhabit its halls ever find peace? And will the true story of Madame Lalaurie's life and crimes ever be fully uncovered? The Lalaurie Mansion, with its dark past and uncertain future, stands at the intersection of history and myth, a place where the lines between the living and the dead are forever blurred. And as long as it remains standing, it will continue to fascinate, terrify, and captivate those who dare to look beyond its elegant exterior and confront the chilling truths that lie within. The mansion's tale, though centuries old, is far from over. As new generations discover the story of Madame Lalaurie and her house of horrors, the legend will continue to grow, ensuring that the Lalaurie Mansion remains one of the most haunting and mysterious locations in all of New Orleans, a place where the past never truly dies, and where the echoes of its dark history continue to reverberate through time. Sarah Lockwood Winchester's life began in a way that gave no hints of the future she would eventually lead. Born in 1839 to a well-to-do family in New Haven, Connecticut, she was brought up in a world of privilege and opportunity. Her family was part of the upper class of New England, and she was afforded the best education available to women at the time. Sarah was said to be highly intelligent, fluent in several languages, and possessing a natural charm that made her a darling of high society. It seemed that she was destined for a prosperous and happy life. In 1862, at the age of 23, Sarah married William Wirt Winchester, the son of Oliver Winchester, the founder of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. At that time, the Winchester rifle was becoming one of the most successful firearms in the world, known for its efficiency and effectiveness. The company's success meant that Sarah and William were part of one of the wealthiest families in America. The couple seemed to have everything one could hope for: wealth, status, and a promising future. But tragedy would soon change the course of Sarah's life forever. Just 4 years into their marriage, in 1866, the couple was struck by a devastating loss. Their only child, Annie Pardee Winchester, was born but died only 6 weeks later from a rare childhood illness known as marasmus. This blow shattered Sarah. The joy of becoming a mother was cruelly taken from her, leaving a wound that would never fully heal. She withdrew from the public eye, sinking into deep sorrow. The pain didn't stop there. Over a decade later, in 1881, Sarah's husband William succumbed to tuberculosis, a disease that had claimed many lives during that time. Now, Sarah was not only grieving the loss of her child, but also the death of her beloved husband. These compounded losses left her in a state of despair, as she found herself alone in the world, burdened by unimaginable grief. Following William's death, Sarah inherited a fortune over $20 million, the equivalent of hundreds of millions in today's dollars, and 50% ownership of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, which provided her with an enormous daily income. But despite her vast wealth, Sarah could not escape the shadows of the past. This is where the story of the Winchester Mystery House begins to take a darker turn. stricken with guilt and believing she was haunted by the spirits of those who had died from the very invention that made her family so rich. Sarah sought answers beyond the material world. Legend has it that she visited a medium in Boston who delivered a chilling message. The spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles were seeking revenge. According to the medium, these spirits were the cause of Sarah's misfortune, and they would continue to torment her unless she did something to appease them. The medium allegedly told Sarah that she needed to move west and build a house to appease these restless spirits. The catch was that construction on this house could never stop. If the building ever ceased, the spirits would come for her. Whether or not this story is entirely true remains a mystery, but what is known is that soon after the meeting with the medium, Sarah moved to California and purchased a small, unfinished farmhouse in the Santa Clara Valley. This house would eventually become the Winchester Mystery House. In 1886, Sarah began the construction that would never end. She hired teams of carpenters, stonemasons, and laborers to work around the clock, expanding the house into a sprawling, labyrinthine mansion. The construction followed no master plan, and the house grew in a seemingly haphazard fashion, with rooms added on top of rooms, staircases leading to nowhere, and doors opening to brick walls. What Sarah Winchester's true intentions were will likely never be fully understood. Some believe she was driven by her guilt, building room after room to confuse and contain the spirits that haunted her. Others speculate that she was simply a woman dealing with unbearable loss and grief, and that the constant construction was a way for her to stay busy, to keep her mind occupied. Still others think Sarah was simply eccentric, and that the bizarre design of the house reflected her unique personality and imagination. Despite the rumors and speculation, Sarah Winchester remained a private figure throughout her life. She never gave interviews, and she rarely spoke about her personal beliefs or the reasons behind the constant construction. To her neighbors, she was an enigma, a wealthy widow who lived in seclusion in her ever-growing mansion, with only her staff and occasional visitors for company. The image of Sarah as a reclusive, grieving widow added to the growing legend surrounding her. Locals whispered about the strange goings-on at the mansion, and stories of hauntings began to circulate. People speculated that Sarah was trying to communicate with the dead, using the house as a kind of spiritual sanctuary. Others said she was building the house as a way to atone for her family's role in the deaths of so many. Whatever her reasons, one thing is clear. Sarah Winchester's life was shaped by loss, and her grief manifested in a way that would leave a lasting impact. The house she built stands as a testament to her pain, her fears, and perhaps her hope that in some way she could make peace with the spirits of the past. As the years rolled by, the Winchester Mansion, now known as the Winchester Mystery House, became a sprawling, bewildering maze of rooms, hallways, and staircases. With each passing day of construction, the house grew more perplexing and even more detached from any logical architectural structure. For those who visited or worked on the mansion, it was clear that this was no ordinary home. The unusual design choices reflected something deeper, something connected to the hidden fears and secrets that Sarah Winchester carried within her. To the casual observer, the house seemed like a bizarre creation, a place where the laws of design and reason simply did not apply. It was easy to get lost within its walls, as the layout made little sense. Long hallways stretched out in random directions, sometimes leading to a dead end or a closet. A staircase might rise for several steps, only to stop abruptly at a ceiling. Doors opened to brick walls, while some even opened to a sheer drop outside the house, with no balcony or landing. It was a place full of strange and unnerving surprises at every turn. But what was the reason for these odd architectural choices? The answer, if there was one, seemed to lie in Sarah Winchester's complex and mysterious relationship with the spirits she believed were haunting her. Some stories claimed that Sarah had designed the house as a way to confuse these spirits, hoping that the labyrinthine design would keep them from finding her. Others suggested that the house was never meant to be understood by the living at all, but instead built as a kind of spiritual puzzle for the dead. What became clear over time was that the house itself seemed to reflect Sarah's growing obsession with the supernatural. In the later years of her life, it was said that she often consulted mediums or even communicated directly with spirits to guide her in the construction process. She allegedly held nightly seances in a special room of the house, known as the Blue Room or the Seance Room, where she would attempt to commune with the spirits and receive their instructions on how to proceed with the building. The room was hidden away in the maze of the mansion, accessible only through secret passages, reinforcing the idea that Sarah was operating in a world that was not fully visible to others. The Blue Room itself was shrouded in mystery. Some accounts described it as a small, dimly lit chamber with a single chair, a writing table, and a bell that Sarah would ring to summon the spirits. The windows were said to be covered with heavy curtains, and the room was always kept locked when not in use. Whether or not these seances were real or simply exaggerated by local legend, it is undeniable that Sarah's belief in the supernatural played a crucial role in shaping the house. She may have seen the spirits not just as vengeful beings, but as her advisors, helping her navigate her strange and solitary life. In addition to the house's baffling architecture, there were other oddities that hinted at Sarah's deeper beliefs. The number 13 appeared repeatedly throughout the mansion. Windows had 13 panes, staircases often had 13 steps, and even the bathrooms featured 13 tiles. Sarah's fascination with this number remains one of the more enduring mysteries of the house. Was it a superstition, a lucky number, or something more significant? Some believe that the number 13 was meant to ward off evil spirits or bring her protection, but Sarah never explained its meaning to anyone, leaving it up to speculation. There were also symbols embedded in the house's architecture that hinted at Sarah's interest in mysticism and the occult. Some believe she was influenced by esoteric teachings or ancient wisdom, possibly incorporating elements of numerology or spiritual symbolism into the house's design. The house itself became a kind of living talisman, full of hidden meanings that only Sarah truly understood. Aside from these symbolic elements, the house also featured cutting-edge technology for its time. Despite the bizarre layout, Sarah spared no expense when it came to modern amenities. The mansion was equipped with indoor plumbing, including hot water, which was a rare luxury in the late 19th century. It also had push-button gas lighting, an advanced intercom system, and even a unique heating system. These modern features stood in stark contrast to the house's chaotic design, creating a strange blend of the old and new. But as impressive as these features were, they only added to the house's mystique. For those who ventured inside, it felt less like a home and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The house was full of secret passageways and hidden doors, many of which led nowhere. Some believed these were designed to help Sarah move through the house unseen or to allow her to escape the spirits that might be following her. Others thought they were simply the product of her eccentric mind, her grief and guilt manifesting in the creation of this strange and haunting structure. The longer the house stood, the more stories began to emerge about its haunted nature. Visitors and workers alike claimed to have experienced strange occurrences within its walls. Some reported hearing footsteps when no one else was around. Others claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving through the hallways or disappearing into walls. The sound of hammering, even after construction had ceased following Sarah's death, was said to echo through the mansion. These ghostly rumors only fueled the legend surrounding the house, making it a destination for those curious about the supernatural. Sarah's isolation and secretive nature only added to the intrigue. She rarely spoke to outsiders, preferring to live alone in her vast mansion, surrounded by the constant noise of construction. Over time, she became known as the Mystery Lady, a widow who had retreated from society into her world of endless building and spiritual consultations. Some saw her as a tragic figure, a woman broken by grief and guilt, while others thought she might have been mentally unwell, driven by irrational fears and superstitions. The house itself became a reflection of Sarah's inner turmoil. The chaotic, nonsensical design was a physical manifestation of the confusion and sorrow that plagued her. For nearly 4 decades, she lived within its walls, overseeing the construction of a mansion that seemed destined never to be finished. And yet, for all its strangeness, the house was her sanctuary, the place where she could try, in her own way, to make peace with the ghosts of her past. The Winchester Mystery House grew into a living legend, a symbol of one woman's battle with forces both seen and unseen. The mysteries that surrounded its construction have never fully been explained, and the house itself continues to captivate and confuse those who visit it. To this day, the questions remain. Was Sarah Winchester truly haunted by the spirits of those who had fallen to the rifles that bore her name? Or was she simply haunted by her own grief, her own fears, building an endless house to distract herself from the loss that had consumed her? In either case, the house stands as a testament to a life marked by tragedy and a mind that sought to cope with it in the only way she knew how, by building, endlessly, until the day she could build no more. As the Winchester Mystery House continued its relentless expansion, Sarah Winchester's life grew increasingly isolated. Although she was one of the wealthiest women in America, she withdrew further and further from society, shutting herself away in her ever-growing mansion. She rarely ventured outside, and the few people who did encounter her described her as a somber, almost ghostly figure who seemed consumed by her private thoughts. This seclusion, combined with the mystery surrounding the house, only deepened the fascination with her and the stories of spirits that surrounded her life. By this time, Sarah had become known as a reclusive widow, a woman who lived in near total isolation, spending her days directing the construction of a house that seemed to have no end. Though she continued to employ a large staff of workers, carpenters, and servants, few knew her personally. She avoided social gatherings and seldom interacted with the community outside of her home. Even among her employees, Sarah was distant, communicating mostly through her foreman or leaving instructions for the workers without speaking to them directly. Those who worked on the house or visited for business purposes reported that Sarah was a kind, though deeply private, employer. She paid her workers generously, ensuring their loyalty and dedication, but they knew little of her beyond the fact that she insisted on the continual building of the mansion. This ongoing construction, regardless of the time of day or the scope of the additions, was a constant in Sarah's life. It was as if stopping, even for a moment, would open the door to the spiritual forces she feared. The growing complexity of the house mirrored the deepening complexity of Sarah's emotional and mental state. The more the mansion expanded, the more labyrinthine it became, and it was clear that the purpose of the construction was no longer practical, if it ever had been. The rooms, hallways, and staircases seemed to follow no logical pattern, as if they were not meant to serve any real human needs. Instead, they appeared to be designed for something or someone else. This endless, obsessive construction became a central part of Sarah's existence, an all-consuming project that kept her mind occupied as she navigated her grief and fear. But Sarah's isolation was not only physical, it was also emotional and psychological. The loss of her daughter Annie, followed by the death of her husband William, had left Sarah profoundly affected. Her wealth, though vast, could not shield her from the pain of those losses. Her retreat from society seemed to be both a way to protect herself from the outside world and a way to escape the guilt she felt about the fortune she had inherited, much of it earned from the Winchester rifles that had claimed so many lives. It's easy to see how Sarah's internal world mirrored the mansion she was building around her. Just as the house became a maze of dead ends, hidden passageways, and unexplained rooms, Sarah's own thoughts seemed to follow similarly confusing and tangled paths. The constant building was, in many ways, a reflection of her own attempts to construct a barrier between herself and the traumas of her past. But beyond the mansion's physical growth, there was another dimension to Sarah's isolation, her relationship with the supernatural. By now, it was widely believed that Sarah's fear of the spirits of those killed by the Winchester rifle drove much of her behavior. Whether these spirits were real or imagined, they had become a defining force in her life. The stories of Sarah holding nightly seances in the Blue Room became widely accepted as fact, even if no one outside her immediate circle ever witnessed them. It was said that Sarah used these seances to communicate with the spirits, seeking guidance on how to build the house in a way that would appease them. While these stories are shrouded in mystery and legend, there's no doubt that Sarah's belief in the spirits was genuine. She seemed to feel a responsibility for the deaths caused by the weapons that had made her family so wealthy, and in her mind, she needed to atone for this. The house, in its bizarre and sprawling design, was her way of making peace with these restless souls, or at least of keeping them at bay. Despite her isolation, Sarah was not entirely alone. She maintained a small, loyal staff who worked and lived in the house with her. Most notably, her niece, Marion Marriott, moved in with her and became one of the few people who had regular access to Sarah's private world. Marion's presence was a comfort to Sarah, offering her some form of human connection in her otherwise solitary existence. Still, even with Marion by her side, Sarah remained deeply withdrawn, a woman whose life had been shaped by loss, guilt, and a relentless fear of the unknown. Those who visited the house during this time often left with strange and unsettling stories. Some spoke of eerie feelings while inside, as if they were being watched. Others claimed to have heard footsteps or voices when no one else was around. The stories of the mansion being haunted began to spread far and wide, adding to the growing legend of both the house and its mysterious owner. The more isolated Sarah became, the more the stories about her grew, turning her into a figure of fascination and fear in the local community. But for Sarah, the isolation wasn't just about escaping from the world, it was about survival. The house, with its endless construction and confusing design, was her fortress against the spirits she believed were after her. She feared that if the building stopped, if the hammers and saws went silent, the spirits would finally catch up to her. In her mind, the ongoing construction was the only thing keeping her safe. The only thing holding back the supernatural forces that had plagued her since the deaths of her husband and child. As the years went on, Sarah's health began to decline. She became more frail and less able to oversee the construction of the house directly. Yet, even as her physical strength waned, her obsession with the mansion continued. Workers still received orders from her, and the building process never ceased. Though she rarely left her bedroom in the later years of her life, Sarah remained deeply involved in every decision related to the house's design and expansion. Her seclusion, combined with her increasing frailty, only added to the sense of mystery surrounding her. To the outside world, Sarah Winchester was a woman trapped by her own grief and fears, locked away in a mansion that grew more bizarre with each passing year. The people of San Jose whispered about the mad widow who lived in her endless house, driven by ghosts and guilt to build and build, as if the construction itself could save her from the darkness that had consumed her life. Yet, to those few who knew her, Sarah was not mad. She was a woman who had experienced unimaginable loss and who had chosen to cope with it in the only way. She knew how by retreating into herself and into the strange, ever-changing mansion that she built around her. For Sarah, the Winchester Mystery House was more than just a home, it was a reflection of her soul. A place where she could try to find peace in a world that had offered her so much pain. But peace, it seemed, would always elude her. And as Sarah's life neared its end, the house stood as a testament to her isolation and the mysteries that had shaped her existence. What would happen to the mansion and the woman who had built it would soon become the final chapter in this story of loss, fear, and an unfinished legacy. In the early morning hours of September 5th, 1922, Sarah Winchester passed away in her sleep at the age of 83. Her death marked the end of nearly 4 decades of continual construction on the Winchester Mystery House. The woman who had isolated herself from the world, driven by grief, guilt, and a fear of the unknown, was gone. But the mansion she had built, the sprawling, labyrinthine structure that defied explanation, remained, standing as both a symbol of her life and a monument to the mysteries she carried with her to the grave. Sarah's passing sent ripples through the community. The locals, who had long whispered stories about the crazy widow and her haunted house, were now free to speculate on what would become of the massive estate. When the news broke that construction had finally stopped, many believed that the spirits who had driven Sarah to build incessantly had finally been appeased. With her death, they assumed, the haunting would end and the mansion would fall silent. But Sarah's legacy was far from over. In the days following her death, rumors and stories about the house continued to spread. What would become of the Winchester Mystery House was a question on everyone's mind. The mansion was not only an architectural marvel, but also a place shrouded in myth and legend. And now, without Sarah's guiding hand, the house itself seemed to take on a life of its own, as if it were still caught between the world of the living and the world of the spirits that had haunted her. The contents of Sarah's will revealed just how secretive she had been about her estate. Despite her vast fortune, she left no clear instructions regarding the future of the house. In fact, she left it out of her will entirely. Instead, her personal belongings and much of her wealth were bequeathed to her niece, Marion Marriott, and a few loyal employees. But the mansion, with its 160 rooms, twisting hallways, and hidden passageways, was left behind, its future uncertain. After Sarah's death, the mansion was thoroughly inspected for the first time by those outside her inner circle. What they found inside only deepened the mysteries surrounding the house. The sprawling structure contained a bewildering assortment of rooms, some of which had likely never been used. Rooms that were locked and hidden were opened for the first time in decades, revealing untouched furniture and decor from a bygone era. Visitors described it as walking through a time capsule, a snapshot of a life that had been suspended in perpetual construction. The sheer scale of the house was astonishing. Workers who had been inside for years had only seen small portions of it. But now, for the first time, the full extent of Sarah's creation was revealed. The mansion included 47 fireplaces, 10,000 window panes, 17 chimneys, 2,000 doors, and miles of hallways. But more than the numbers, it was the sheer strangeness of the design that captured people's attention. Trapdoors, false staircases, and rooms within rooms created an experience that was unlike anything else. The house seemed designed to confuse and disorient anyone who stepped inside. One of the most puzzling discoveries was the existence of entire wings of the house that had been sealed off. These areas, forgotten and left unfinished, added to the eerie atmosphere. It was as if Sarah had simply abandoned certain projects in mid-construction, locking the doors and moving on to other sections of the mansion. These sealed-off areas fueled speculation about Sarah's mental state in her later years. Had she grown too frail to oversee the construction? Or had the spirits, for some unknown reason, instructed her to leave these areas unfinished? The public's fascination with the house only grew after Sarah's death. Entrepreneurs saw an opportunity, and soon after, the mansion was opened to the public as a tourist attraction. It was quickly dubbed the Winchester Mystery House, and people flocked to see the bizarre structure for themselves. The stories of Sarah's nightly seances, her fear of the spirits, and her obsessive need to continue building made for a compelling narrative that drew in curious visitors. But for all the ghost stories and legends that surrounded the house, it was also a marvel of construction. Architects and engineers were both baffled and impressed by the mansion's design. Though much of it defied traditional logic, the craftsmanship and attention to detail were undeniable. The house was both a maze and a masterpiece, a physical manifestation of one woman's eccentricities and fears. Over the years, the stories about the house have evolved, and it has become a destination for paranormal enthusiasts who believe that Sarah's spirits still linger in the mansion. Countless visitors and paranormal investigators claim to have experienced strange occurrences while inside unexplained cold spots. The feeling of being watched, and even sightings of shadowy figures moving through the halls. The legend of the haunted Winchester Mystery House has grown, turning it into one of the most famous haunted houses in America. Yet for all the stories of hauntings and restless spirits, the house also stands as a testament to Sarah's life and the struggle she endured. Her grief, her guilt, and her fear of the unknown were woven into the very fabric of the mansion, and it is impossible to separate the structure from the woman who built it. The house, in all its confusion and chaos, was Sarah's way of coping with the tragedies that had marked her life. It was both her prison and her refuge, a place where she could hide from the world and from the spirits she believed were haunting her. Today, the Winchester Mystery House remains an enduring symbol of one woman's attempt to make sense of her own suffering. It is a place of intrigue and mystery, where visitors come to marvel at its strange architecture and to ponder the life of the woman who created it. The mansion, with its endless rooms and hidden passageways, continues to draw people in, much as it did during Sarah's lifetime. But even now, nearly a century after her death, the true meaning of the house and the full extent of Sarah's motivations remains elusive. For Sarah Winchester, the house was never just a building. It was a way to keep the spirits at bay, a way to make peace with the past, and perhaps a way to atone for the bloodshed caused by the rifles that bore her name. But in the end, the house became more than just a home. It became a symbol of loss, fear, and the lengths to which one woman was willing to go in order to protect herself from forces, both real and imagined. As visitors walk through the twisting hallways and climb the staircases that lead nowhere, they are not just exploring a mansion. They are stepping into the mind of Sarah Winchester, a woman who spent her life haunted by both the living and the dead. And in doing so, they become part of a legacy that continues to captivate, confuse, and mystify all who encounter it. The Winchester Mystery House, with its endless secrets and unanswered questions, will likely never reveal all of its mysteries. But perhaps that is the point. For Sarah Winchester, the house was not meant to be understood by the living. It was a place for the spirits, and for herself to find some semblance of peace in a world that had been marked by tragedy. And in its strange, unfinished state, the house continues to serve as a reminder of the mysteries that lie within us all. In the early 19th century, the Bell family lived a quiet, simple life in the small town of Adams, Tennessee. John Bell, the patriarch of the family, had worked hard to build a successful farm, where he lived with his wife, Lucy, and their children, including their daughter Betsy. The farm sprawled across hundreds of acres, surrounded by dense forests, where the Bell family found peace and contentment. Life in the rural South was not easy, but the Bells were well respected in their community, known for their generosity and strong sense of morality. The Bell family's daily routines were like that of many families in the area. They rose with the sun, worked the fields, tended to livestock, and came together at the end of the day for dinner and prayer. But beneath this idyllic surface, something unsettling was beginning to take root, something that would soon shatter their peaceful existence. It started with small, almost imperceptible disturbances. At first, John Bell noticed odd occurrences around the farm doors, creaking open without cause. The occasional flicker of shadow in the corner of his vision, or the sound of footsteps in an empty room. At first, he brushed these things off as tricks of the mind, a tired farmer imagining things after long days of work. But soon, it became clear that these were not just idle imaginings. The disturbances grew louder, more frequent, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't long before Lucy and the children started to experience the same strange phenomena. They heard faint, whispering voices at night, unintelligible but persistent. Betsy, the youngest daughter, seemed especially affected, waking up from nightmares of unseen hands touching her, tugging at her blankets, or whispering in her ear. Initially, the Bells tried to explain these occurrences away. They told themselves it was the wind, or perhaps an animal making noises in the walls. After all, the old house had its fair share of creaks and groans, and the forest surrounding the farm could easily produce such eerie sounds at night. But as time went on, these rational explanations no longer sufficed. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, the strange occurrences reached a new level of intensity. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house. It was as if someone or something was pounding on the walls from the outside. John jumped to his feet, certain that someone was playing a prank on them. He rushed outside, but there was no one to be found. The knocking continued from within the house, as though it was coming from the very walls themselves. The family was unnerved, but tried to dismiss it once again. They returned to their meal, but the atmosphere had changed. What had once been a warm and welcoming home was now filled with an air of dread. Over the next few days, the noises continued to grow louder and more violent. The strange knocking and thumping sounds seemed to follow the family wherever they went, even echoing through the halls in the dead of night. It wasn't long before other, more alarming phenomena began to occur. Objects moved on their own chairs, scraped across the floor. Doors slammed shut without explanation, and, most disturbingly, the Bell children reported feeling invisible hands grabbing at them during the night. Betsy, in particular, bore the brunt of the disturbances. At night, she would wake up screaming, her hair being pulled or her blankets yanked from her bed. No matter how tightly she held on to them, they would be violently ripped away. The once cheerful and energetic girl became pale and withdrawn, terrified of going to bed each night. Lucy, her mother, tried to comfort her, but even she could not deny that something unnatural was happening in their home. John Bell, ever the practical man, tried to keep his family grounded. He assured them that there had to be a logical explanation for these occurrences. Perhaps it was some kind of wild animal causing the noises, or a mischievous neighbor playing pranks on them. But deep down, even he was beginning to doubt his own words. As the disturbances persisted, the Bell family could no longer keep the strange happenings to themselves. Word began to spread throughout the small town of Adams, and curious neighbors came to witness the strange events for themselves. Some were skeptical, thinking it was all just a trick or an exaggeration, but others were convinced that the Bell family was truly being plagued by something beyond the natural world. One night, a neighbor named James Johnston and his wife came to stay with the Bells, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. They sat in the Bells' living room, waiting for the disturbances to begin. At first, everything was quiet, but then, just as the Bell family had described, the knocking started. It was faint at first, but it quickly grew louder and more insistent, as if something was trying to break through the walls. Johnston, a devout man, attempted to confront whatever was causing the noise, calling out into the air, demanding it to stop in the name of God. But instead of stopping, the knocking seemed to grow angrier. Over the course of the night, The Johnston couple experienced the same eerie phenomena that had been plaguing the Bells' disembodied voices, objects moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of dread. By the next morning, they left the Bell home convinced that something supernatural was at play. This was no prank or figment of the imagination. As word spread through the town, more people came to witness the strange events. But instead of bringing relief, the attention only seemed to fuel the disturbances. The whispers grew louder, and the unseen presence became bolder. Betsy's nightly torment worsened, and the entity began speaking more clearly, often calling out Betsy's name or mocking the family. The Bell family, once pillars of their community, began to withdraw. Friends and neighbors, though curious, started to distance themselves, fearful of becoming the next target of the mysterious force. John Bell's health began to decline, and the weight of the haunting seemed to take a toll on the entire family. Despite their prayers and their attempts to rid themselves of the entity, the Bell family was trapped in a nightmare that showed no signs of ending. And so, as the haunting intensified, the Bells could no longer deny the terrifying reality that had invaded their once peaceful home. The mysterious force that had begun as a series of minor disturbances was now an all-encompassing presence, one that threatened to tear their family apart, piece by piece. This was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, the disturbances at the Bell family farm became impossible to ignore. The entity, which the family had begun to refer to as the witch, grew more aggressive with each passing day. What had once been subtle knocks and whispers had now turned into full-fledged physical encounters, leaving the Bells terrified and desperate for answers. The witch began to speak clearly, often in a mocking, taunting tone. It seemed to take great pleasure in tormenting John Bell in particular, but no one in the family was immune to its wrath. Each night, the house echoed with sounds of scratching, tapping, and low growls. Objects flew across rooms, furniture shifted of its own accord, and at times, the presence of something sinister seemed to fill the air so completely that even breathing felt oppressive. One night, while the family sat huddled together in the living room, hoping for a few hours of peace, the entity made itself unmistakably known. Without warning, a cold wind blew through the room, even though all the doors and windows were closed tight. The candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. And then, in the silence that followed, a voice emerged from the shadows. It was low, raspy, and full of malice. "I am here," it said. The family froze in fear. John, ever the stoic father, tried to calm his wife and children, but his voice betrayed his unease. The voice continued, laughing softly, as if enjoying their terror. "John Bell," it whispered, "you will pay for your sins." The words hung in the air, chilling the room. John's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to show his fear. What sins could the witch possibly be referring to? He had always prided himself on being an honest, God-fearing man. But the witch's accusations unsettled him, as if it knew something about him that no one else did. The manifestations became bolder after that night. The witch no longer hid in the shadows, but seemed to revel in making itself known. At times, it would speak to the family for hours, mocking them, recounting details of their lives with eerie accuracy, and making ominous predictions about the future. The entity's voice was unsettling. It could sound like a whisper one moment, then shift into a growling, menacing tone the next. The Bell family soon realized they were not dealing with a mere ghost or poltergeist. This was something far more powerful and malevolent. The witch was not bound by the laws of the natural world, and its influence reached beyond the Bell home, affecting the nearby community as well. Neighbors and visitors who came to investigate the Bell Witch were often met with their own unsettling experiences. Some reported hearing the same mocking voice in their ears, while others felt invisible hands tugging at their clothes or hair. Word of the haunting spread far and wide, and soon people from neighboring towns and counties came to witness the strange happenings for themselves. Among the visitors was a local preacher named Reverend James Gunn. He had heard the stories about the Bell Witch, but dismissed them as exaggerations or folk tales. Determined to prove that there was nothing supernatural at play, he decided to visit the Bell home and see for himself. Upon entering the house, Reverend Gunn felt a heaviness in the air, but he remained resolute. He gathered the family together in the living room and led them in prayer, asking for God's protection and for the entity to leave the Bell family in peace. As the Reverend's voice filled the room, the witch remained silent. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Reverend's prayers had worked. The house was still, the air calm. But just as the family began to relax, a deafening noise erupted from the walls. The witch's voice cut through the chaos, laughing maniacally. "You think you can make me leave with your prayers?" It jeered. "I'm not going anywhere." The Reverend's face paled, but he continued to pray. The witch's voice grew louder, shouting over him, mocking him, twisting the words of his prayers into insults. The family watched in horror as the Reverend, usually a man of unshakable faith, faltered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the witch fell silent once more. Reverend Gunn left the Bell home that night, visibly shaken. He refused to speak of what had happened and never returned to the farm. His failure to dispel the entity only served to strengthen the witch's hold on the Bell family, and the haunting intensified. John Bell's health began to worsen in the days following the Reverend's visit. He grew weak and pale, often complaining of severe headaches and unexplained pains. Though he tried to keep up with his work on the farm, his strength was fading. The witch seemed to take delight in his suffering, frequently taunting him with cruel remarks. "You're not long for this world, John Bell," it would say, a hint of glee in its voice. "I'll see to that." The rest of the family, too, suffered under the witch's influence. Betsy Bell, already plagued by nightly disturbances, was now being physically attacked. The invisible hands that had once tugged at her blankets now slapped and pinched her, leaving her bruised and shaken. She grew more withdrawn, her once bright eyes now dull with fear and exhaustion. At times, the witch seemed almost playful, moving objects around the house or mimicking the voices of family members. But there was always an undercurrent of malice to its actions, as though it was testing the family's limits, pushing them closer and closer to the edge of despair. Despite the relentless torment, the Bell family tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. They continued their work on the farm, attended church, and did their best to keep the haunting a secret from those who hadn't already heard the rumors. But it was becoming increasingly clear that they were living under constant threat, and that no one, neither local preachers nor friends, could save them from the witch's wrath. The haunting took its toll, not just on the family's physical health, but also on their emotional and mental well-being. John Bell, once a strong and capable man, was now a shadow of his former self. Betsy, once full of youthful energy, seemed to wither under the weight of the witch's torment. And the rest of the family, though not as directly targeted, lived in constant fear of what might happen next. As the entity's power grew, so did its influence. The Bell family, once pillars of their community, were now seen as cursed. Neighbors once eager to help now kept their distance, afraid of being caught in the witch's web. Visitors from far and wide came to witness the haunting for themselves, but none could offer any real solutions or relief. The Bell Witch was no longer just a terrifying presence in their home. It had become an unstoppable force, determined to bring John Bell and his family to their breaking point. By the end of that long summer, the Bell family had been pushed to their limits. The witch's presence had grown stronger, more menacing, and it had singled out John Bell as the primary target of its relentless torment. John, once a strong, determined man, was now weakened, both physically and emotionally. His health had begun to deteriorate rapidly, and the more the witch mocked and cursed him, the more his condition worsened. John had tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, continuing his work on the farm and tending to the land, but the witch had made it nearly impossible. Each time he went outside, he felt a crushing weight on his chest, a pressure that seemed to drain his energy. His limbs would grow heavy, his head would throb, and his vision would blur. At times, he would collapse in the fields, barely able to breathe, only to hear the witch's mocking laughter echoing in his ears. "You'll not escape me, John Bell," the witch would whisper. "No matter where you go, I will follow." John's family watched helplessly as he grew weaker. Lucy, his wife, was heartbroken, doing all she could to nurse him back to health. She prepared herbal remedies, prayed constantly, and called upon neighbors for assistance, but nothing seemed to ease his pain. The witch's curse had taken hold of him, and it was clear that it had no intention of releasing its grip. As the haunting intensified, the witch's attacks on John became more personal and vicious. It wasn't just the physical toll it took on him. It was the emotional and mental assault that began to weigh him down. The witch's voice taunted him relentlessly, reminding him of past mistakes, whispering dark thoughts into his ear. "Do you really think anyone cares about you, John?" it would hiss. "Look at your family. They pity you. They're ashamed of you." The witch's cruel words seemed to seep into John's mind, and he began to withdraw from his family. Once a proud, strong father, he now spent long hours alone, unable to shake the feeling that the witch was right, that he had somehow brought this curse upon them all. Betsy Bell, John's daughter, continued to suffer as well. While the witch focused much of its energy on John, it hadn't abandoned its torment of her. Betsy was still plagued by nightly disturbances, her hair pulled, her blankets ripped from her bed, invisible hands leaving bruises on her skin. She would often wake up crying, terrified and exhausted. The witch seemed to take pleasure in tormenting both father and daughter, feeding off their shared despair. One evening, as the family gathered around John's bedside, the witch's voice rang out, louder than ever before. It spoke with a chilling certainty, its tone filled with malice. "John Bell," it declared, "your time is nearly up. I will see to it that you never leave this bed again." The family was frozen in fear, unable to respond. John lay pale and weak, his breathing shallow, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. The witch's words were a death sentence, and deep down, John knew that there was nothing he could do to escape its curse. The family sought help from a number of sources. Doctors were called in from nearby towns to examine John's failing health, but none of them could explain his symptoms. They offered little more than sympathy and a few ineffective treatments. Religious leaders continued to visit the farm, offering prayers and blessings, but the witch only grew more hostile in their presence, mocking their faith and driving them away. Despite the constant fear and the witch's taunts, the Bell family refused to abandon John. Lucy stayed by his side day and night, her devotion unshaken by the witch's threats. Betsy, too, remained close, though her own suffering was nearly unbearable. The witch's attacks had left her with nightmares and a deep sense of dread, but she couldn't bring herself to leave her father in his time of need. The town of Adams had once rallied around the Bell family, but now, many in the community had begun to keep their distance. Some feared that the curse might spread beyond the Bell household, while others whispered that John Bell had somehow deserved this fate, that the witch's curse was punishment for some unknown wrongdoing. Rumors circulated about John's past, about business deals gone wrong or possible feuds with neighbors, though nothing was ever confirmed. Still, the sense of isolation grew, and the Bell family found themselves more alone than ever. As John's health declined, the witch's visits became even more frequent. It no longer confined itself to the shadows or dark corners of the house. The family would often hear it moving through the rooms in broad daylight, knocking on walls, slamming doors, and throwing objects across the floor. The witch's voice was everywhere, filling the house with an oppressive sense of dread. "You can't hide from me," it would taunt. I see everything." John's physical decline was now undeniable. His once robust frame had withered, and he could no longer leave his bed. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and lifeless. The man who had once been the strength of the family was now reduced to a shell of his former self. It wasn't just the physical toll that worried his family. John had become quiet, withdrawn, as if the witch's constant taunts had broken something inside him. He would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, saying nothing. The witch's presence loomed over him, feeding on his fear and despair. Lucy tried to comfort him, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The once vibrant John Bell was fading away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The witch had made it clear that John's suffering would not end until his life was taken, and it seemed determined to carry out that promise. As the days turned into weeks, John's condition worsened, and the witch's taunts grew more ominous. It began to speak of John's death as though it was inevitable, as though it was simply waiting for the right moment to claim him. "Your time is near, John Bell," the witch would whisper. "You can't run from fate." John's family clung to the hope that anything might intervene to save him. But with each passing day, that hope dwindled. The witch's power was too great, its grip on John too strong, and in their hearts, the Bell family knew that they were fighting a battle they couldn't win. Despite their prayers, despite their efforts to rid themselves of the entity, the curse had taken its toll. John Bell's life was slipping away, and the witch was the unseen hand guiding him toward the end. In the cold light of autumn, the Bell family was forced to face the grim reality that the witch's prophecy might be fulfilled, and that John Bell's fate was sealed. By the time autumn had turned to winter, John Bell's fate seemed inevitable. His once strong frame was now frail and weak, his breath shallow, and his mind dulled by the constant torment of the Bell Witch. The family had watched helplessly as he deteriorated day by day, his strength slowly fading. It was clear to everyone John Bell would not survive much longer. The witch's voice had become a constant presence in the Bell home, its taunts crueler and more direct. It had stopped hiding in the shadows or limiting its torment to the night. The entity now spoke openly, addressing John by name, mocking his frailty and delighting in his suffering. "John Bell," the witch would hiss, "your end is near. I will see to it that you never leave that bed alive." John, too weak to respond, simply lay there, his eyes glazed over. The energy and life that had once filled him were gone. The relentless presence of the witch had taken everything from him, his health, his peace of mind, and even his will to fight. Lucy Bell, ever the devoted wife, stayed by John's side day and night. She prayed for a miracle, but deep down, she knew there would be no saving her husband. The curse had become too powerful, and John was too far gone. She held his hand and whispered words of comfort to him, though she knew he could no longer hear her. The witch's voice drowned out everything, filling the air with its poisonous words. As John's health deteriorated, the family began to prepare for the worst. Neighbors who had once avoided the Bell home now came to offer their condolences, though there was little they could do to help. The curse that had gripped John Bell was beyond their understanding, and most of them believed that his fate had been sealed long ago. One cold December morning, John Bell's condition took a sudden and dramatic turn for the worse. His breathing became shallow and labored, and his skin took on a pale, almost ghostly hue. Lucy, realizing the end was near, gathered the family around his bedside. Betsy, her face tear-streaked, sat close, clutching her father's hand. She had suffered as much as he had, haunted by the witch's attacks and nightly torment, but she refused to leave him in his final moments. As the family watched over him, the witch's voice rang out once more, filling the room with its mocking laughter. "It's time, John Bell," the witch jeered. "You can't escape me. Your suffering is almost over." John Bell's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, but he was too weak to respond. His breath came in shallow gasps, his chest rising and falling with great effort. The witch's voice seemed to hang in the air, as if it was waiting for something. Then, suddenly, John's body convulsed, and his breathing stopped altogether. Lucy gasped, reaching for her husband, but it was too late. John Bell was gone. A stunned silence filled the room as the reality of his death sank in. The family, overwhelmed with grief, wept quietly. But their sorrow was soon interrupted by the witch's triumphant voice. "I did it," the witch declared with unmistakable glee. "John Bell is dead, and I have won." The room seemed to grow colder as the entity's words echoed through the house. It was a chilling, victorious statement, one that left no doubt that the witch had claimed John Bell's life as it had promised to do. There was nothing left to fight, no hope of a last-minute reprieve. The Bell Witch had carried out its curse to its fullest extent. Despite their heartbreak, the family had no time to process their grief. The witch's presence continued to loom over them, reminding them that John's death was not the end of its influence. As the days passed, the family prepared for John's burial. The once well-respected man would be laid to rest in the family's private cemetery, but even in death, there was no peace. On the day of John Bell's funeral, the witch's voice could be heard during the service, cackling and mocking the mourners. It taunted them as they lowered John's body into the ground, declaring that it had brought about his death and that no one could have stopped it. Those in attendance were horrified, but they could do nothing. The entity's hold over the Bell family had extended even into John's final moments. As the last shovelful of earth was placed over John's grave, the witch spoke one last time. "I will never forget what I've done here," it said, its voice filled with satisfaction. "John Bell's death was my doing, and I will celebrate it for all eternity." The funeral ended in a somber, haunted silence, with those who had gathered feeling the weight of the supernatural event they had just witnessed. The story of the Bell Witch had already spread far and wide, but now it seemed undeniable. A force beyond human understanding had taken the life of John Bell, and it had done so in full view of the entire community. In the days following John's death, the witch's activity in the Bell home subsided somewhat, but it did not disappear entirely. The entity continued to make its presence known, though it seemed less focused on tormenting the family. The nights were quieter, with fewer disturbances, but the fear of the witch's return still hung in the air like a dark cloud. Betsy Bell, still grieving the loss of her father, was not entirely free from the witch's attention. Though the entity had shifted its focus, it had not entirely abandoned its attacks on her. Betsy continued to experience eerie occurrences, objects moving on their own, strange noises in the night, and the occasional whisper of the witch's voice in her ear. The witch's influence had not left the Bell family, even in the wake of John's death. As the weeks turned into months, the Bell family did their best to move on. They continued to run the farm, attended church, and tried to resume their normal lives. But the memory of John's death and the witch's role in it lingered. The curse that had claimed his life was a shadow that none of them could escape. For many in the community, John Bell's death became a cautionary tale proof that the Bell Witch was real and that its power was something to be feared. Though some still questioned whether the story had been exaggerated, those who had witnessed the events firsthand knew the truth. The Bell Witch was not just a legend. It was a living, malevolent force, and it had left an indelible mark on the Bell family, one that would be remembered for generations to come. And so, the Bell family tried to carry on, forever haunted by the memory of the curse that had taken John Bell's life. The witch had claimed its victory, but its shadow still lingered, reminding them that the past could never be truly forgotten. After John Bell's death, the Bell family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. The curse that had haunted them for so long had taken its toll, and the sense of loss was overwhelming. Though the witch's torment had lessened, its presence still lingered, and the scars it had left behind, both physical and emotional, were deep. The Bell Witch had claimed its victory, but the family was left to endure its lingering effects. For Betsy Bell, the loss of her father weighed heavily on her heart. She had suffered greatly under the witch's torment, and even now, with her father gone, she was not free. The witch's presence still made itself known in subtle ways, like a constant reminder of the darkness that had plagued their home. Strange noises continued to echo through the house at night, and Betsy still felt the occasional tug on her hair or the whisper of her name in the dark. It was as if the witch had left a part of itself behind, refusing to let go entirely. Despite the ongoing disturbances, the family tried to move on. They continued to run the farm and live their lives as best they could. But things were never the same. The once lively and joyful Bell household had become a place of silence and fear. Neighbors who had once visited regularly now stayed away, and the family found themselves isolated, left to cope with their grief and the remnants of the haunting. Betsy, in particular, struggled to find a sense of peace. The witch had focused much of its energy on her throughout the years, and she had endured countless nights of terror. Even though the witch no longer tormented her with the same intensity, the trauma of the past haunted her. She couldn't escape the memories of being attacked, mocked, and manipulated by an unseen force. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the windows, sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just the haunting that troubled Betsy. It was the uncertainty of what the witch had truly wanted. Why had it chosen to torment her family? Why had it fixated on her father with such hatred? These questions gnawed at her, but no answers ever came. The witch's motivations remained as mysterious as ever, and the lack of closure left Betsy with a constant sense of unease. As Betsy grew older, she tried to find solace in her relationships. She had been courted by a local boy, Joshua Gardner, before the witch's attacks had begun. The two had been close, and many in the community believed they would one day marry. However, the witch's interference had cast a dark shadow over their courtship. The entity had taken a particular interest in Betsy's romantic life, often mocking her and Joshua during their time together. The witch had made it clear that it disapproved of their relationship, and the constant torment became too much for Betsy to bear. After her father's death, the strain on her and Joshua's relationship intensified. The witch's presence was always lurking, and Betsy feared that it would never allow her to live a normal life. Eventually, under the weight of the supernatural interference, Betsy made the difficult decision to end her engagement to Joshua. It was a heartbreaking choice, but she believed it was the only way to protect him from the witch's wrath. With her engagement broken and her family still grieving, Betsy felt lost. The witch had not only taken her father, but had also robbed her of her future with Joshua. She wondered if she would ever be able to escape the curse that had followed her for so long. The constant presence of the Bell Witch had left her with deep emotional wounds that refused to heal. Though the Bell family's suffering had been immense, their story spread far beyond the borders of Adams, Tennessee. Word of the Bell Witch haunting reached people across the state and even beyond. The tale of a malevolent spirit that had tormented a family so relentlessly became a point of fascination, with many curious onlookers traveling to the Bell farm to see the infamous house for themselves. Among those who took an interest in the Bell Witch case was none other than General Andrew Jackson, who would later become the President of the United States. According to local legend, Jackson had heard the stories of the Bell Witch and decided to investigate the haunting for himself. He and a group of men traveled to the Bell farm, eager to see if the supernatural tales were true. As the story goes, Jackson's group experienced firsthand the power of the Bell Witch. It is said that their carriage suddenly stopped in its tracks as they approached the farm, as if an invisible force had taken hold of the horses. No matter how hard they tried, they could not get the carriage to move. Jackson, reportedly intrigued but also unnerved, declared that he had encountered something beyond his understanding. His men, terrified by the experience, begged him to turn back. Whether or not the story is entirely true, it added to the growing legend of the Bell Witch and solidified its place in American folklore. In the years following John Bell's death, the Bell family tried to move forward, but the witch's legacy remained. People in the community continued to speak of the haunting, and it became a cautionary tale passed down through generations. Many believed that the Bell Witch's curse had not truly ended, that its presence still lingered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Betsy, too, eventually moved on with her life. She married another man, Richard Powell, and left the Bell farm behind. Though she tried to distance herself from the trauma of the past, the memories of the witch's attacks stayed with her. She remained cautious, always looking over her shoulder, afraid that the witch might one day return to torment her again. As time passed, the Bell Witch became a fixture of local legend. Stories of the haunting were told and retold, each version slightly different from the last. Some claimed the witch had been a vengeful spirit, while others believed it was a demon sent to punish John Bell for his sins. There were even those who speculated that the witch had never been real at all, that it was a product of the family's fears and the power of suggestion. But for those who had lived through it, especially the Bell family, the witch was all too real. Its power had been felt in every corner of their lives, and the pain it had caused was undeniable. The Bell Witch haunting left an indelible mark on the family and the community, a haunting reminder that some forces in the world cannot be easily explained or defeated. In the end, the Bell family survived, but they were forever changed. The witch had claimed its victory with John Bell's death, but its true legacy was the fear and uncertainty it left behind. Even years after the haunting had subsided, the Bell Witch remained a presence in their lives, a shadow that would never truly fade. And so, the story of the Bell Witch lived on past from generation to generation, a tale of darkness, mystery, and the enduring strength of a family who had faced the unimaginable and survived. In the late 1930s, as the world teetered on the brink of war, the quiet English countryside in Suffolk held secrets long buried beneath the earth. The land, rolling and green, had a gentle way of keeping its past concealed. But for Edith Pretty, the owner of Sutton Hoo Estate, the ancient burial mounds on her property stirred her curiosity. Edith was a wealthy widow in her 50s, and despite her age, she possessed an adventurous spirit. She had always been fascinated by history and archaeology. After years of living on the estate and gazing at the mounds, she began to wonder what lay beneath them. Her interest grew after hearing local legends that these mounds might hide long-lost treasures, perhaps even the resting place of kings. It was the summer of 1938 when Edith finally decided to act. She had been reading articles on recent archaeological digs and, inspired, she contacted the local Ipswich Museum for advice. They recommended Basil Brown, a self-taught archaeologist with a passion for unearthing history. Though not formally trained, Brown had a deep knowledge of the land and a reputation for careful, thorough work. Edith invited him to the estate, and soon an agreement was made to begin exploring the mysterious mounds. Basil Brown was not a man of wealth or high education, but he possessed a talent that few others did, a sense of the land. He had an ability to read the earth and understand its secrets. When he first set foot on Sutton Hoo, he was struck by the sheer size of the mounds. Some were as tall as trees, looming over the landscape like sentinels guarding something precious. The excavation began in earnest, but no one could have imagined what they were about to uncover. The first few days were slow. Basil and his small team of laborers worked carefully, mindful not to damage anything. They had no idea what lay beneath, whether it would be an empty mound or something extraordinary. At first, The dig revealed little more than small fragments of iron and decayed wood, signs that the mound had been disturbed before. Yet Basil remained optimistic. He knew that patience was key. As the team continued to remove layers of earth, something remarkable began to take shape: the outline of a ship. Brown could hardly believe his eyes. The sandy soil had preserved an impression of a ship, large enough to befit royalty. The wood had long since decayed, leaving only a ghostly imprint, but the form of the ship was unmistakable. It stretched nearly 90 feet long, a size that suggested this was no ordinary burial. This was something far grander. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Edith Pretty herself came to the site daily, watching with excitement as the ancient vessel emerged from the soil. She had hoped for something significant, but the magnitude of what was being uncovered exceeded her wildest dreams. The ship's structure, though fragile and partially destroyed by time, was evidence of a culture that had mastery over the sea. But it wasn't just the size of the ship that astonished the team. As they dug deeper, they realized that the vessel had been used as a burial ship, likely for someone of great importance. The thought lingered. Could this be the resting place of a long-forgotten king? Excitement turned to trepidation as the team carefully uncovered more of the ship. The scale of the task ahead became clearer. This was not a simple dig. It was a mission to recover a piece of history so old that its very existence had been forgotten. Every move had to be precise, every piece of earth removed with care. Basil Brown knew the significance of what they had found, but he also understood the risks. An excavation of this scale had never been attempted before in England, at least not with such a delicate site. The ship was a marvel, but it was fragile. Any mistake could destroy what little remained. As more of the ship was revealed, it became clear that this was not an isolated find. The ship was part of a much larger burial complex, perhaps one used by an elite group of people warriors, leaders, and rulers. The ship had been placed in the earth with great care, loaded with treasures meant to accompany its occupant into the afterlife. By the end of the summer, the excavation had gained attention beyond Suffolk. Archaeologists from across Britain began to take notice. The press, too, caught wind of the discovery. Headlines soon spoke of Britain's greatest find, and speculation ran wild about the identity of the person buried within the ship. Some believed it could be a legendary king or warrior, a figure whose story had been lost to time. Despite the growing attention, Edith Pretty remained modest about her role in the discovery. She had simply acted on a hunch, following her curiosity. But as the ship continued to reveal its secrets, it became clear that her decision to explore the mounds was one that would reshape the understanding of England's ancient history. The discovery of the ship set the stage for a much larger adventure, one that would continue to unfold in the months and years to come. For now, though, the ship lay beneath the soil, waiting for its full story to be told. As the sun rose over the fields of Suffolk in the summer of 1939, a small team of workers arrived at Suttonhoo, eager to continue their excavation of what was shaping up to be one of the most remarkable finds in British history. Basil Brown, the archaeologist leading the dig, had uncovered the outline of an ancient ship. But what lay beneath was still a mystery. The real work was only just beginning. The excavation site, now buzzing with activity, was far from a glamorous operation. With no heavy machinery and only simple tools like shovels, trowels, and brushes, the work was slow, meticulous, and physically demanding. Each layer of soil had to be removed carefully to avoid disturbing any fragile artifacts that might lie beneath the surface. Time was not on their side, as the threat of war loomed over Europe, adding urgency to their efforts. A small team of workers, mostly local laborers, had little formal training in archaeology, but they followed his instructions diligently. He had a deep respect for the past, and he knew that any mistake, no matter how small, could erase vital clues to understanding the burial. The ship they had uncovered was not made of iron or stone. It had once been a grand wooden vessel. Over the centuries, the wood had decayed, leaving only the impression of the ship in the soil. This meant that the entire outline of the ship was incredibly delicate, requiring precision to uncover it without causing damage. As they dug deeper, the true size of the ship became more apparent. Nearly 90 feet long, it was the kind of ship that could only have belonged to someone of great importance. It wasn't just its size that amazed the team. It was the craftsmanship. The lines of the ship's hull were graceful, curving elegantly through the earth, a testament to the shipbuilders who had constructed it more than 1,000 years earlier. Brown's excitement grew as the excavation progressed, but so did his sense of responsibility. The discovery of the ship was already monumental, but he knew there had to be more. Anglo-Saxon burial customs suggested that whoever was buried here had been laid to rest with treasures fit for a king. The ship, it seemed, was just the beginning. As the days passed, the team began to uncover a wealth of small finds, pieces of iron, fragments of pottery, and even a few rusted nails that hinted at the ship's construction. These items were important, but they were not the treasures the team had hoped to find. Still, Basil remained patient. He knew that the most valuable artifacts were likely still hidden deeper within the burial chamber, and he was determined to reach them. The dig became more challenging as they approached the center of the ship, where the burial chamber was believed to be. The earth here was heavier, and the signs of earlier disturbances, likely grave robbers from centuries past, became more evident. Some parts of the ship had been damaged, either by the passage of time or by human hands, but there were still large sections of the vessel that remained untouched. One day, as the team carefully removed soil from the center of the ship, they uncovered something extraordinary, a large wooden structure that had once formed the burial chamber. Though the wood itself had long since decayed, the impression it left behind was unmistakable. The chamber was large enough to hold not only a body, but also the treasures that would have accompanied it. Basil Brown was struck by the enormity of what they had found. This wasn't just a ship burial, it was a royal tomb. The chamber was situated in the very heart of the ship, a place of honor reserved for someone of the highest status. Though the chamber had been damaged over the centuries, there were still signs that it had once held magnificent items. The team worked slowly, methodically, removing the earth surrounding the chamber. As they did, they began to find objects that hinted at the grandeur of the burial. The first signs were small metal fragments, delicate pieces of jewelry, and the remnants of finely crafted items that had once adorned the body. These objects, though decayed, were exquisite in their design, suggesting that the person buried here had been incredibly wealthy, perhaps even a king. But the true treasures of the burial had not yet been uncovered. Brown knew that the most significant finds were still hidden beneath layers of soil. The team worked tirelessly, day after day, uncovering more and more of the burial chamber. The anticipation was palpable. Every piece of earth they removed brought them closer to the moment of revelation. As the excavation continued, word of the discovery spread even further. Archaeologists from across the country began to take notice, and some even traveled to Sutton Hoo to witness the dig for themselves. It was becoming clear that this was no ordinary excavation. What they had uncovered was one of the greatest archaeological finds in British history, and it was only a matter of time before the world would know the full extent of the discovery. Despite the growing attention, Basil Brown remained focused on the task at hand. The pressure was immense, but he knew that they were on the verge of something incredible. The burial chamber was nearly fully exposed, and soon they would uncover the treasures that had been hidden for centuries. As the final layers of earth were removed from the chamber, the team began to realize just how grand the burial truly was. They found evidence of finely wrought metalwork, including gold and silver items that had once adorned the person buried within. Though many of the treasures had been damaged or lost to time, what remained was enough to suggest that this was the burial of someone truly significant. The discovery of the burial chamber was a turning point in the excavation. What had begun as a simple curiosity had become a full-scale archaeological dig, one that would change the understanding of early medieval England. For Basil Brown and his team, the discovery of the ship and the chamber was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would unfold in the months and years to come. The discovery of the burial chamber at Sutton Hoo marked a turning point in the excavation. The ship had been a stunning find, but the treasures hidden within the chamber were what truly revealed the significance of this ancient burial. As Basil Brown and his team carefully removed the last layers of soil, they began to uncover a collection of artifacts that hinted at the immense wealth and status of the person entombed within. The burial chamber, located at the heart of the ship, had likely once contained a wooden coffin, though all traces of the wood had long since decayed. What remained, however, was a dazzling array of items that had been placed alongside the body items that spoke of a life of power, influence, and high social standing. This was no ordinary grave. This was the final resting place of someone of immense importance, perhaps even a king. One of the first objects to emerge from the soil was a magnificent helmet. Though damaged by time and the elements, it was clear that this was no simple piece of armor. The helmet was adorned with intricate designs, including representations of fierce animals and warriors, all crafted in exquisite detail. It had once been worn by a figure of great significance, someone who likely commanded both respect and fear. The helmet, with its mask-like faceplate and iron cheek pieces, gave the impression of a powerful warrior king. Its craftsmanship suggested that the person buried here had connections to distant lands, perhaps Scandinavia, where similar helmets had been found. As the team continued to excavate, they uncovered more treasures. A finely wrought sword was found next, its hilt inlaid with gold and garnets. The sword was a symbol of power, not just a weapon, but a representation of the authority of the one who had wielded it. Alongside the sword were other items associated with warfare, including a large shield and a collection of spears. These were the tools of a leader, someone who had commanded armies and fought in battles. The items painted a picture of a man who had been both a ruler and a warrior, a figure whose life had been shaped by conflict and conquest. Yet the burial chamber also contained objects of great beauty, items that suggested the person buried here had enjoyed a life of luxury and refinement. Gold buckles, intricately crafted jewelry, and a collection of silverware were found, each piece more ornate than the last. Some of the items had been imported from far-off lands, including silver bowls and spoons from the Byzantine Empire, evidence of trade and cultural connections that spanned continents. These items showed that the person buried here had lived in a time when England was not an isolated island, but part of a wider world, a world connected by trade routes and diplomacy. Perhaps the most striking find was a large, elaborately decorated belt buckle made of solid gold. Weighing over a pound, the buckle was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, featuring interwoven patterns that symbolized strength and unity. Its size and weight suggested that it had been worn by someone of great stature, both physically and socially. The buckle, along with the other treasures, spoke of immense wealth, the kind of wealth that only the most powerful in society could accumulate. As the team cataloged the items found in the burial chamber, it became increasingly clear that this was not just a burial, it was a statement. The person buried here had wanted to be remembered, to leave a lasting legacy. The ship, the treasures, and the sheer scale of the burial all suggested that this had been a leader of extraordinary influence, someone who had shaped the course of history in their time. But who was this person? That question lingered over the excavation like a shadow. No body had been found in the burial chamber. Centuries of decay had left little more than traces of organic matter where the body once lay. Still, archaeologists were able to piece together clues from the artifacts and the burial itself. The size of the ship and the opulence of the treasures suggested that this was the grave of an Anglo-Saxon king, perhaps even Redwald, the ruler of East Anglia in the early 7th century. Redwald was a powerful figure in Anglo-Saxon England. According to historical records, he had been a strong leader who wielded significant influence over other kings in the region. He had converted to Christianity, but also maintained traditional pagan beliefs, a fact reflected in the mix of Christian and pagan symbols found in the burial chamber. If this was indeed the grave of Redwald, it would confirm his status as one of the most important figures of the Anglo-Saxon period. The burial also revealed much about the society in which this leader had lived. The treasures found in the chamber were not just symbols of personal wealth. They were representations of the interconnectedness of early medieval Europe. The silver from Byzantium, the garnets from India, and the craftsmanship influenced by Scandinavian designs all pointed to a world in which goods, ideas, and cultures flowed across borders. But while the items found in the burial chamber were awe-inspiring, they also raise questions. What had caused this king to be buried in such a grand manner? Had his death been the result of natural causes, or had he fallen in battle? Had this burial been a display of his people's devotion, or was it meant to send a message to those who came after him? The ship, laden with treasures, seemed to speak of a desire to carry these symbols of power into the afterlife, a belief that even in death, this leader would continue to hold sway over the world. As the excavation came to an end, the team knew they had uncovered something truly extraordinary. The burial chamber at Sutton Hoo had revealed treasures that had been hidden for more than 1,000 years. Treasures that told the story of a long-forgotten king and the world in which he had lived. For Basil Brown and his team, it was the culmination of months of hard work and dedication. But for the wider world, it was just the beginning of a new understanding of England's past. The treasures of Sutton Hoo would soon be displayed in museums, where people from all over the world could come and marvel at the craftsmanship and beauty of these ancient artifacts. Yet, even as they were cleaned and preserved, they would remain tied to the mystery of the person who had been buried in that ship, a figure whose identity might never be known for certain, but whose legacy would live on through the objects he left behind. The burial chamber had been unearthed, but its secrets would continue to captivate the imaginations of historians, archaeologists, and the public for generations to come. The excavation at Sutton Hoo had revealed extraordinary treasures, but it was the discovery's ripple effect that truly began to reshape the understanding of England's ancient past. As word of the find spread across Britain, the magnitude of what had been uncovered became clear, not just to archaeologists, but to the general public, scholars, and even political figures. The Sutton Hoo ship burial was quickly recognized as one of the most important archaeological finds in British history, a window into a time that had long been shrouded in mystery. In the summer of 1939, just as the treasures from Sutton Hoo were being carefully excavated, the world was on the brink of conflict. The tensions leading to the outbreak of World War II were mounting, and in many ways, the discovery at Sutton Hoo served as a reminder of Britain's deep history and resilience. As the nation prepared for the uncertainties of war, the treasures from this ancient burial offered a sense of pride and continuity, connecting modern Britons to their Anglo-Saxon ancestors. For Edith Pretty, the landowner whose curiosity had sparked the excavation, the discovery had an emotional impact. She had long suspected that the mounds on her estate hid something special, but even she couldn't have imagined the grandeur of what lay beneath. Edith, a reserved and thoughtful woman, had always been interested in history and archaeology, but the scale of the find at Sutton Hoo exceeded her wildest expectations. She visited the excavation site daily, quietly observing as Basil Brown and his team painstakingly unearthed each artifact. Though Edith had initiated the dig, she remained humble about her role, insisting that the discovery belonged to history. In the months following the excavation, Edith made a decision that would forever cement her place in the story of Sutton Hoo. Rather than keeping the treasures for herself or selling them, she donated the entire collection to the British Museum. It was an act of generosity that reflected her deep sense of responsibility to history and her desire for the treasures to be studied and preserved for future generations. The decision ensured that the artifacts would be accessible to the public and to scholars who would spend decades analyzing the find and its implications. The British Museum, which had long been a repository for the world's greatest cultural artifacts, was quick to recognize the importance of the Sutton Hoo treasures. The items, including the famous helmet, the gold belt buckle, and the intricately crafted jewelry, were displayed prominently, attracting visitors from across the country and beyond. People flocked to see the artifacts, eager to catch a glimpse of the ancient past and to learn more about the mysterious figure who had been buried in such splendor. The public reaction to the Sutton Hoo discovery was overwhelming. Newspapers ran headlines about the buried treasure and the king in the ship, fueling speculation about the identity of the person entombed in the ship burial. Theories abounded, with some suggesting that the ship had belonged to a legendary warrior, while others believed it was the resting place of a great king. The fascination with the find extended beyond the borders of Britain, with international scholars and archaeologists expressing interest in studying the artifacts and the burial site. But while the treasures themselves were stunning, it was the broader implications of the discovery that truly excited the academic community. Before Sutton Hoo, the early medieval period in England, often referred to as the Dark Ages, was seen as a time of cultural stagnation, a period following the fall of the Roman Empire, when much of Europe was thought to have fallen into disarray. The Sutton Hoo find challenged this view, offering evidence of a sophisticated and cosmopolitan society that had existed in England in the 6th and 7th centuries. The discovery of objects from distant lands, including silverware from Byzantium and garnets from as far away as India, demonstrated that the Anglo-Saxon elite were part of a vast network of trade and cultural exchange. These connections extended across Europe and beyond, suggesting that early medieval England was far more interconnected with the wider world than previously thought. The items found in the burial chamber revealed a society that valued craftsmanship, artistry, and wealth, a far cry from the image of a dark and isolated age. For historians and archaeologists, the Sutton Hoo ship burial opened up new lines of inquiry. Who was the person buried in the ship, and what did his burial tell us about the society he lived in? The consensus began to form around the idea that the burial belonged to Redwold, the king of East Anglia, a powerful figure who had been instrumental in the politics of early medieval England. While no definitive proof existed to confirm Redwold's identity as the person buried in the ship, the evidence, both historical and archaeological, pointed strongly in that direction. As the academic community delved deeper into the meaning of the Sutton Hoo treasures, the site itself became a point of national pride. The discovery was seen as a testament to Britain's deep and rich history, a reminder that the country's roots extended far back into the early medieval period. This sense of pride was particularly potent in the context of the looming war. As Britain prepared for the possibility of conflict, the Sutton Hoo find served as a symbol of resilience and continuity, a reminder that the nation had weathered countless challenges throughout its long history. However, the outbreak of World War II in September 1939 brought new challenges to the preservation of the Sutton Hoo treasures. The artifacts, now housed in the British Museum, were packed away and moved to secure storage to protect them from potential bombing raids. It would be several years before they could be displayed again, but even in storage, the significance of the find continued to grow. In the years following the war, the treasures of Sutton Hoo were once again placed on display, drawing renewed interest from scholars and the public alike. The site itself became a place of pilgrimage for those interested in England's early medieval past. Archaeological work at Sutton Hoo continued, with new discoveries shedding further light on the burial and the culture that had created it. As time passed, the Sutton Hoo ship burial became more than just an archaeological discovery. It became a symbol of Britain's cultural heritage. The treasures found in the burial chamber were celebrated not just for their beauty, but for what they represented, a connection to the distant past, to a time when kings ruled the land and the seas, and when the Anglo-Saxon people laid the foundations for the England that would emerge in the centuries to come. The impact of Sutton Hoo extended beyond the academic world. It influenced popular culture, inspiring books, films, and even artwork. The treasures, with their intricate designs and mysterious origins, captured the imagination of people around the world. The Sutton Hoo helmet, in particular, became an iconic symbol of Anglo-Saxon England, its distinctive design appearing in countless representations of early medieval warriors. But more than anything, Sutton Hoo stood as a testament to the power of curiosity and perseverance. What had begun as a simple desire to explore a set of burial mounds on a quiet Suffolk estate had led to one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. The impact of that discovery would be felt for generations, reminding the world of the enduring legacy of the Anglo-Saxon people and the mysteries that still lay buried beneath the earth. The Sutton Hoo discovery forever altered the understanding of early medieval England. Long after the final artifact had been unearthed and the excavation had concluded, the mysteries of the ship burial continued to captivate historians, archaeologists, and the general public. The artifacts, now safely housed in the British Museum, were more than just relics. They were keys to unlocking a forgotten past, one that had been shrouded in mystery for centuries. As scholars continued to study the treasures, new insights into the life and times of the Anglo-Saxons emerged. The burial itself became a symbol of the sophisticated society that had existed in England during the early 7th century, a society far more complex and interconnected than previously believed. Sutton Hoo had given the world a glimpse into the life of a ruler who had commanded immense respect and wielded significant power, whether it was Redwold, as many believed, or another figure of equal prominence. Despite all that had been uncovered, questions still lingered. Chief among them was the identity of the person buried in the ship. While the evidence pointed strongly to Redwold, the lack of definitive proof left room for debate. Some scholars suggested alternative possibilities, including other kings or powerful nobles from the East Anglian kingdom. The absence of human remains, likely lost to the ravages of time and the acidic soil, meant that the mystery of the burial's occupant might never be fully resolved. Even without a clear identity, the significance of the burial was undeniable. The ship, the treasures, and the careful arrangement of the grave goods all pointed to someone of immense importance. This was a person whose life had been marked by power, prestige, and wealth, someone who had commanded loyalty and respect from those around them. The grandeur of the burial reflected the importance placed on status and honor in Anglo-Saxon society, where kings and nobles were celebrated both in life and in death. The mystery extended beyond the identity of the buried figure. The purpose of the ship burial itself raised questions. Why had such an elaborate ceremony been conducted, and what did it symbolize? Ship burials were rare in England, and the practice was more commonly associated with Scandinavian cultures. Some historians believe that the Sutton Hoo burial was a reflection of the complex cultural influences at play in early medieval England. The Anglo-Saxons, who had come to Britain as invaders, had absorbed elements of both Roman and Scandinavian traditions, creating a unique blend of customs and beliefs. The ship burial, with its mixture of Christian and pagan symbols, suggested that the person buried at Sutton Hoo had navigated a world in which old and new beliefs coexisted. Redwold, if he was indeed the person buried there, had been known for his dual faith embracing Christianity while still honoring traditional pagan practices. The burial reflected this tension, with the treasures revealing a world in which religious beliefs were evolving, but not yet settled. The items found in the burial chamber also offered clues about the broader world in which this person had lived. The silverware from Byzantium, the garnets from India, and the craftsmanship influenced by Scandinavian and Frankish designs all pointed to a world connected by trade and diplomacy. The Sutton Hoo burial was not just a testament to one person's power. It was a reflection of a global network of exchange, where goods and ideas flowed across borders. As the years passed, Sutton Hoo became a touchstone for those studying the early medieval period. Archaeologists continued to explore the site, conducting further excavations and uncovering additional evidence of the Anglo-Saxon people who had once inhabited the area. While no discoveries rivaled the grandeur of the original ship burial, each new find added to the growing picture of life in East Anglia during the early 7th century. The site itself was transformed into a place of historical importance. Sutton Hoo, once a quiet estate with little public attention, became a destination for visitors from around the world. People came to walk among the burial mounds, to imagine the grand ship that had once rested beneath the earth, and to learn about the Anglo-Saxon kings who had shaped England's early history. The National Trust, which took over the management of the site, worked to preserve the landscape and educate the public about the significance of the discovery. The Sutton Hoo ship burial also left a lasting mark on popular culture. The story of the excavation and the treasures it uncovered inspired books, documentaries, and films, all seeking to capture the drama and mystery of the find. The iconic image of the Sutton Hoo helmet, with its menacing faceplate and intricate designs, became a symbol of Anglo-Saxon England, appearing in countless depictions of early medieval warriors. The discovery continued to spark the imaginations of writers, artists, and filmmakers who were drawn to the idea of a long-lost king buried with his treasures, waiting to be rediscovered. Yet for all the attention Sutton Hoo received, the site remained, at its core, a place of deep historical and emotional significance. The ship burial was a reminder of the fragility of history, of how easily the past can be forgotten, buried beneath layers of earth, and how it can be uncovered only through persistence and curiosity. Basil Brown, the self-taught archaeologist who had first unearthed the ship, had never imagined the scope of what he would find. His dedication and careful work had revealed a treasure trove of history that might otherwise have remained hidden. In the decades following the excavation, Brown's role in the discovery was finally recognized. Though initially overshadowed by professional archaeologists who had later joined the dig, Brown's contributions were celebrated as those of a skilled and dedicated archaeologist. His careful methods and deep respect for the site had ensured that the treasures of Sutton Hoo were preserved for future generations. Today, he is remembered as the man who brought one of England's greatest archaeological discoveries to light. As the 21st century began, Sutton Hoo continued to capture the public's imagination. New technologies allowed archaeologists to explore the site in ways that had once been impossible, using ground-penetrating radar and other tools to search for hidden features beneath the earth. These advancements, while yielding fascinating insights, also underscored how much of the past still lay waiting to be discovered. The ship burial at Sutton Hoo was just one chapter in a much larger story, one that archaeologists and historians were still piecing together. For all the answers Sutton Hoo had provided, the site remained a place of wonder and speculation. Who had been buried there, and what had their life been like? What had driven their people to create such a magnificent burial? And what did it say about their beliefs, their values, and their place in the world? These questions, and many others, would likely remain unanswered, but that was part of the magic of Sutton Hoo. It was a place where history and mystery intertwined, where the past reached out to the present in ways both profound and elusive. The ship and its treasures had been buried for more than 1,000 years. hidden from the world, waiting for the right moment to be found. And now, as the story of Sutton Hoo continued to unfold, it was clear that the discovery had not only changed the way people understood the past, it had become part of the fabric of Britain's national identity, a reminder of the deep roots that connected the present to the distant, mysterious past. The Bell family lived a quiet and peaceful life in the rural countryside of Adams, Tennessee, in the early 19th century. John Bell, the patriarch, was a well-respected farmer who had moved to the area with his wife, Lucy, and their children, hoping to build a prosperous and serene life. Their farmhouse, nestled among sprawling fields and towering trees, seemed like the perfect place to raise a family. Little did they know, something far darker lurked beneath the calm surface of their lives. It was in 1817 when strange things began to occur on the Bell property. At first, the signs were subtle and easy to dismiss. John would occasionally see odd animals wandering near the edges of his fields, creatures he couldn't quite identify, their forms shifting and unnatural. He spotted what looked like a large dog with a rabbit's head, and another time, a bird too large for the region perched in a tree. These sightings left him uneasy, but he chalked them up to tricks of the mind, refusing to believe anything was truly wrong. Soon, however, the strange events escalated beyond harmless wildlife. The first real sign of trouble came when John Bell began hearing odd sounds around the farmhouse. At night, the walls creaked and groaned in ways that didn't seem natural, like the wood itself was trying to speak. The noise of knocking echoed through the rooms, and sometimes it seemed like chains were being dragged across the floor, though nothing was ever found out of place. It wasn't long before the rest of the family began to notice these sounds as well. The Bell children, especially young Betsy, started waking up terrified, claiming they heard faint whispering in their ears while they slept. Lucy Bell, though skeptical at first, could no longer deny that something was very wrong when she too began hearing unexplained sounds, as though someone or something was watching them from just beyond their sight. One evening, as the family sat around their dinner table, a loud, sharp knock came from the front door. John, thinking it might be a late visitor or a neighbor in need, got up to answer it, only to find no one there. The knock came again, this time from the back door, but once again, there was no one in sight. The third knock came from inside the house itself. The family sat frozen in fear, unable to explain how this could be happening. They had begun to realize that something far more sinister than a prank was at play. Over the next few days, the haunting sounds grew louder and more frequent. It was as though the house had come alive with a presence that couldn't be seen, but was undeniably there. The walls echoed with strange voices, doors creaked open and shut on their own, and footsteps could be heard pacing through empty rooms. Yet, whenever the family tried to investigate, they found nothing. It was as though an invisible force had taken up residence in their home, and it wasn't going to leave anytime soon. John Bell, being a man of faith and reason, sought to keep his family calm, reassuring them that there had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps it was the wind or some natural phenomena, but deep down, he knew better. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and no amount of reason could explain away the growing terror they felt each night. Despite his outward calm, he couldn't shake the creeping fear that this presence had come for him. Specifically, the once tranquil Bell home had become a place of dread. No longer able to ignore the strange happenings, John confided in a close neighbor, seeking advice on what to do. But the neighbor had no solutions. Word began to spread in the small community that the Bell family was experiencing something otherworldly, though few believed it at first. After all, who would believe that a house could be haunted by something invisible, something so relentless and violent? The days passed, but the entity showed no sign of leaving. The family could no longer sleep through the night, as the knocking, the scratching sounds, and the heavy footsteps never ceased. It was as if the entity wanted them to know it was always there, lurking just beyond the edge of their understanding, waiting for something darker yet to come. As the weeks wore on, the Bell family found themselves slipping into a state of constant fear and exhaustion. They had no idea what the entity wanted, but they knew it wasn't going to leave on its own. Whatever this presence was, it had taken root in their home, and they were helpless to stop it. The Bell Witch had arrived, and the nightmare was only beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the Bell family's quiet farmhouse became a place of escalating fear and confusion. What had begun as strange noises and eerie disturbances quickly transformed into something far more aggressive. It seemed the entity, whatever it was growing stronger. No longer content with simply haunting the house, it began to physically target the family, with a particular focus on John Bell and his young daughter, Betsy. The first signs of the entity's more dangerous nature emerged when Betsy started to experience strange sensations at night. At first, it felt like gentle taps on her skin, like someone lightly flicking her arm. She tried to ignore it, thinking it was nothing more than her imagination. But soon, these sensations grew into something much more alarming. She would wake up in the middle of the night to the feeling of her hair being yanked, her bed covers ripped off, or an invisible hand slapping her face. These attacks left her terrified and helpless, but they were just the beginning. As Betsy's torment grew, so did the malevolent presence in the house. Objects that once sat quietly on shelves would now fly across the room without warning, smashing into walls or crashing to the floor. Chairs would tip over by themselves, and dishes would shatter for no apparent reason. The invisible force seemed to revel in causing chaos, as if it found joy in making the Bell family live in constant fear. John Bell, too, was not spared from the entity's wrath. One morning, as he was working in the fields, he felt a sudden sharp pain in his face, as though he had been struck by an unseen hand. He stumbled, clutching his cheek, but when he looked around, there was no one there. This mysterious attack repeated itself several times over the coming weeks. John would be walking through his home or tending to his land when, without warning, he would feel the sting of an invisible force hitting him. Sometimes it was a slap, other times a violent push that nearly knocked him off his feet. The relentless torment began to take its toll on the entire family. Betsy, once a bright and lively girl, became withdrawn and fearful. She spent her days in a constant state of anxiety, never knowing when the next attack would come. Her schoolwork suffered, and she became too frightened to sleep alone at night, often seeking comfort in her parents' room. The stress weighed heavily on John and Lucy Bell as well, as they watched their daughter suffer and felt powerless to stop it. Despite their growing desperation, the Bell family tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. They continued their daily routines, farming, cooking, and tending to the household, hoping that by ignoring the entity, it might go away. But the more they ignored it, the more aggressive it seemed to become. The Bell children, especially Betsy, were often targeted while they slept. On one particularly terrifying night, Betsy awoke to find herself being lifted from her bed by an unseen force. She screamed in terror, and her parents rushed to her room, only to find her suspended in midair, her body thrashing as if being held by an invisible grip. As soon as John and Lucy entered the room, Betsy was dropped back onto her bed, gasping for breath and trembling with fear. There was no explanation for what had just happened, no way to rationalize the nightmare their daughter was living through. The attacks didn't stop with Betsy. Other members of the household also began experiencing physical assaults. Knocks and slaps came out of nowhere, leaving bruises and welts on their skin. The Bell family soon realized that they were dealing with a force beyond their understanding, one that was not only malicious, but intelligent. It seemed to know exactly when and how to strike, always leaving them on edge, waiting for the next act of violence. Word of the Bell family's plight began to spread throughout the community. Neighbors who visited the house witnessed the strange occurrences for themselves, objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut, and the eerie sounds of whispering voices that seemed to come from nowhere. Some locals believed the family had fallen victim to a powerful curse, while others thought they were dealing with an angry spirit seeking revenge for some past wrong. As the entity's attacks grew more frequent and more violent, the family became desperate for answers. John Bell turned to friends and neighbors for help, hoping that someone might know how to rid their home of the invisible force. But no one had any solutions. Ministers and pastors were called in to pray over the house, but even their spiritual guidance couldn't stop the torment. The Bell family began to lose hope, feeling as though they were trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The Bell Witch, as the entity had now come to be called, was relentless. It seemed to feed off the family's fear and suffering, growing more powerful with each passing day. John Bell, in particular, seemed to be the primary target. His health began to deteriorate as the constant stress and fear took a toll on his body. His once strong frame became frail, and his hands shook with anxiety. It was clear that the entity wanted something, but what it wanted remained a mystery. Despite the family's efforts to resist, they were losing their battle against the unseen force. The Bell Witch had made its intentions clear. It wasn't going to leave until it had finished whatever dark mission it had come to carry out. And as the attacks on Betsy and John grew more intense, the family couldn't help but wonder if they would survive the ordeal. The torment had already reached unbearable heights for the Bell family, but they were about to discover that the entity haunting their home was far more terrifying than they ever imagined. What had begun as an invisible, violent presence soon revealed itself to be something that could speak, something that could communicate with chilling clarity. It wasn't just a ghost or some mindless force. It was intelligent, cunning, and it had a voice. The first time the entity spoke, it caught the family completely off guard. They had grown used to the eerie knocks, disembodied footsteps, and the unsettling physical attacks. But when the family was sitting quietly one evening, bracing themselves for whatever might come next, a voice filled the room cold, clear, and unmistakably human. It came from nowhere and everywhere all at once, as if the very walls of the house were speaking. "I am here for John Bell," the voice said plainly. The family froze, staring at one another in disbelief. Was this some kind of cruel trick? But no, they all heard it. John Bell's face drained of color. Whatever this thing was, it had just declared that it was targeting him specifically. The air in the room seemed to thicken with dread as the voice continued, sometimes mocking, sometimes angry, but always clear in its hatred for John. The entity called itself Kate, though it later became widely known as the Bell Witch, and it made no secret of its intentions. The voice was unlike anything they had ever experienced before. It wasn't just random murmurs or whispers. It spoke in full sentences, as if it were a living person. It would ask questions, make demands, and even hold conversations with the family and their visitors. What made it even more terrifying was its depth of knowledge. Kate seemed to know things about the Bell family and their neighbors, secrets, events, and details that no one outside the family could have known. It could describe what was happening in other parts of town as if it had been there itself, watching and listening. The voice also seemed to enjoy tormenting Betsy. It would call her name in the dead of night, whisper cruel things in her ear, and laugh whenever she cried out in fear. It wasn't just content with physical attacks anymore. It wanted to break her spirit, to make her feel hopeless and afraid. The once bright and happy child was now a shadow of herself, living in constant fear of when the voice would speak again, what it would say, and what it would do. John Bell was another favorite target of the witch. Kate often berated him, insulting him, and claiming that it had come to end his life. It was as though the entity had a personal vendetta against him. The reasons were never entirely clear, though rumors swirled that Kate Batts, a neighbor with whom John had a falling out over a land deal, had cursed the Bell family out of spite. Whether or not this was true didn't seem to matter. The entity that called itself Kate seemed determined to fulfill its promise. The Bell family's friends and neighbors were initially skeptical of their claims about a talking spirit. But that changed quickly when word spread of the strange occurrences, and people began visiting the Bell household themselves to hear the voice. Ministers, curious locals, and even travelers from neighboring counties came to witness the phenomenon, and none left without being thoroughly shaken by what they experienced. The witch, it seemed, enjoyed the attention, often showing off its knowledge of distant events or entertaining visitors by speaking in different voices and tones. It could imitate the voice of anyone it chose. Sometimes it would even mimic the voices of the family themselves, causing confusion and fear. As the entity continued to speak, it became clear that this was more than just a haunting. It was something far more dangerous. The witch took pleasure in manipulating those around it, bending their will through fear, and taunting them with its knowledge and power. The Bell family tried to get help from local ministers, hoping that religious intervention might drive the entity away, but nothing worked. The prayers, the exorcisms, the blessings on the house, none of it made any difference. The voice persisted, as powerful and menacing as ever. And with each passing day, the witch's focus on John Bell grew more intense. It would mock him relentlessly, whispering threats and insults while he went about his daily life. His health, already fragile from the stress of living under such torment, began to deteriorate further. He would wake up in the middle of the night to find himself unable to move, his limbs heavy as though held down by an invisible force. He started suffering from unexplained seizures, his once strong and commanding presence reduced to that of a sickly and terrified man. Despite the terror it inflicted, the Bell Witch's voice wasn't always violent. It had moments of disturbing calm, where it would engage in conversations, sometimes even laughing and joking with visitors. It seemed to enjoy playing with people's emotions, luring them into a false sense of security before turning on them with renewed ferocity. The voice was always unpredictable. One moment, it would be soft and friendly, and the next it would erupt in anger, hurling insults or making sinister threats. The most chilling aspect of the witch's communication was its promise. It had come to take John Bell's life, and it wouldn't stop until it had succeeded. The family was trapped in their own home, with no means of escape from the torment that had invaded every corner of their lives. Each day brought them closer to the grim reality that the witch might indeed be able to carry out its threat. By now, the Bell Witch was not just a local legend, but a phenomenon that had captured the attention of people far and wide. Visitors continued to flock to the Bell Farm, seeking answers or hoping to experience the haunting for themselves. But for John Bell and his family, this was no spectacle. It was a living nightmare, and they were all too aware that the witch's promises were not idle threats. The Bell family had now come to understand the true nature of the entity they were dealing with. It wasn't just haunting them, it was targeting them, manipulating them, and working toward a single, terrifying goal. And as John Bell's health worsened, the family could only wait in dread, knowing that the worst was yet to come. As the witch's torment grew more relentless, it became clear that John Bell's days were numbered. The entity that had come to be known as the Bell Witch had made its intentions known from the start. It was determined to take John Bell's life, and now it seemed ready to fulfill that dark promise. Despite the Bell family's efforts to protect him, John's health was rapidly deteriorating, and there was little they could do to stop it. By late 1820, John had become a shadow of his former self. Once a strong and respected farmer, he was now a frail, weak man who could barely leave his bed. The constant stress and fear had taken a toll on him both physically and mentally. and the witch seemed to take delight in watching him waste away. His hands shook uncontrollably, and he struggled to speak or even move at times. The witch's attacks had become more personal, more direct, and more vicious as the weeks wore on. Each day brought new torments. The witch, with its unnerving voice, would whisper cruel taunts in John's ear, reminding him of its power over him. "Your time is near, John Bell," it would say, filling the room with a dark, ominous energy. Sometimes the voice would mock his weakness, laughing at his failing body, while other times it would grow angry. One evening, threatened as the Bell family gathered in John's room, the witch's presence, the family could only watch in horror as John's condition worsened, thick and suffocating. John lay motionless, his breathing shallow and labored. He had been bedridden for days, and the once vibrant man was now barely recognizable. The room was tense with dread as the witch's voice filled the space again, speaking in low, menacing tones. It declared once more that it had come to end John's life, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The following morning, on December 20th, 1820, John Bell did not wake. Lucy, his wife, was the first to find him lying still in his bed. His breathing had become so faint that, at first, it seemed like he might still be alive. But as she approached, it became clear that he was slipping away. She called for the children, and soon the entire family gathered by John's side, praying for a miracle that would never come. In the midst of their grief, the witch's voice rang out again, cold and triumphant. "I did it. I finished what I came to do." The words hung heavy in the air, and the family was left in stunned silence. The witch had claimed responsibility for John Bell's death, just as it had promised it would. There was no mistaking it now. The entity had carried out its grim mission. The cause of John's sudden decline and death had remained a mystery, but in the days following his passing, the family discovered something chilling. Among John's medicine bottles, they found one that contained a strange, unidentified liquid. No one in the family recognized it, and it hadn't been prescribed by the doctor. Desperate for answers, they tested the substance by giving a small amount to the family's cat. Tragically, the animal didn't survive for long after consuming the liquid, confirming the family's worst fears. This mysterious substance had likely been used to poison John Bell. When confronted with this discovery, the witch's voice erupted in gleeful laughter. "I gave him that potion," it proclaimed, reveling in its victory. There was no longer any doubt that the Bell Witch had been responsible for John's death, using the strange liquid to carry out its fatal plan. It was a devastating realization for the Bell family, who had fought so hard to protect John, only to lose him to the very force they had feared for so long. As the Bell family prepared for John's funeral, the witch continued its disturbing behavior. During the solemn event, while friends and neighbors gathered to pay their respects, the entity made its presence known in a horrifying display. The witch's voice interrupted the proceedings, mocking the mourners, laughing loudly, and making crude jokes at the expense of the grieving family. It was a final, cruel insult, adding a layer of humiliation to the pain and sorrow of John Bell's passing. The family was left devastated, unable to escape the reach of the entity, even in their time of mourning. The death of John Bell marked the culmination of the witch's campaign of terror. For years, the Bell family had endured unimaginable horrors, but now the entity had accomplished what it had set out to do from the very beginning. It had taken John's life, and it had done so with a sense of satisfaction and malicious pride. The family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, unsure of what would happen next. Yet, as dark as things had become, the witch's influence over the Bell household began to wane after John's death. The violent attacks on Betsy grew less frequent, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the farm seemed to lift, if only slightly. The entity, it seemed, had fulfilled its purpose, and with John gone, its presence started to fade. Despite the diminishing torment, the Bell family could never truly move on from what had happened. The memory of John's suffering and the witch's cruel laughter haunted them, even as the physical manifestations of the haunting began to dissipate. For the Bell children, especially Betsy, the scars of those years would last a lifetime. John Bell's death left a mark not only on his family, but on the entire community. The story of the Bell Witch spread far beyond Adams, Tennessee, becoming a legend that would be passed down for generations. People from all over the country would hear the tale of the haunting of the vengeful witch who had taken the life of a man without ever being seen. Though the entity seemed to have accomplished its goal, the question of why it had chosen John Bell and what truly fueled its hatred remained a mystery, one that would linger long after the haunting had ended. In the wake of John Bell's death, the Bell family hoped that the terror that had gripped their home for so many years might finally be over. The Bell Witch, after all, had achieved its dark purpose. It had taken John's life, just as it had promised, and for a while, it seemed that the entity might finally leave them in peace. The violent attacks on Betsy subsided, and the eerie disturbances that had plagued their home began to fade. But even though the immediate threat had diminished, the shadow of the Bell Witch still loomed over the family, the farm, and the entire community. In the months following John Bell's death, the once bustling Bell farmhouse became a place of deep sorrow and quiet reflection. The family tried to rebuild their lives, but the emotional scars left by the witch's torment were too deep to heal easily. Betsy, in particular, had suffered immensely. The physical attacks she had endured were gone, but the emotional trauma lingered. She had been haunted, manipulated, and terrorized by an unseen force that seemed to take joy in her pain. Now, though the witch's voice had gone silent, Betsy was left to grapple with the overwhelming fear and sadness that had become a part of her life. Despite the relative calm that followed John's death, the Bell family couldn't shake the feeling that the witch's presence still lingered, watching and waiting. They continued to hear faint, disembodied whispers from time to time, though the voice was not as aggressive as it once was. It was as if the entity was reminding them that it hadn't truly left, that it still had power over them. For the Bell family, life would never return to the way it had been before the haunting began. The peace they had once known was gone, replaced by the weight of the tragedy they had endured. As time passed, Betsy tried to move forward with her life. She had been engaged to a young man named Joshua Gardner before the haunting escalated, but the strain of the witch's attacks had put their relationship on hold. The entity had made it clear that it disapproved of their union, taunting Betsy about her engagement, and even going so far as to threaten Joshua's life. Betsy had been forced to break off the engagement, fearing that the witch's wrath would bring more suffering to those she loved. Even after John Bell's death, Betsy remained hesitant to reconnect with Joshua. She had no way of knowing whether the witch would return if she reignited the relationship. The fear of bringing the entity back into her life was too great, and so she made the difficult decision to move on. Betsy eventually married another man, Richard Powell, a local school teacher who had been a long-time family friend. Though Powell was much older than Betsy, their marriage brought her some measure of stability, and together they left Adams, Tennessee, to start a new life away from the farm that had become a place of nightmares. For the rest of the Bell family, life continued quietly on the farm. Though the Bell Witch's direct attacks had ceased, the farm remained a source of fascination and fear for the local community. Neighbors and visitors would often talk about the haunting in hushed tones, wondering if the witch might one day return. The legend of the Bell Witch grew, spreading far beyond the small Tennessee town. People from neighboring states came to visit the farm, hoping to catch a glimpse of the paranormal activity that had once terrorized the Bell family. As the years went by, the story of the Bell Witch took on a life of its own. The tale of the vengeful entity that had tormented the Bell family and claimed the life of John Bell became a piece of local folklore, passed down from generation to generation. It was whispered around campfires, told in taverns and shared among friends. Each retelling seemed to grow more fantastical, adding new details and layers to the story. Some claimed the witch was the spirit of a wronged woman. Others believed it was a demon sent to punish John Bell for some unknown sin. The true origin of the Bell Witch remained a mystery, one that no amount of speculation could solve. Despite the enduring fear surrounding the legend, the Bell family's descendants were able to live relatively peaceful lives after the events. Betsy and her husband lived out the rest of their days away from Adams, and though they could never fully escape the memory of the haunting, they managed to build a life free from the witch's influence. The Bell farm remained in the family for generations, though none who lived there ever experienced the same level of terror that John and Betsy had. However, the Bell Witch wasn't entirely gone. Several years after John Bell's death, the entity reportedly returned to the farm for a brief period. It made its presence known by speaking to members of the Bell family, though its tone was far less menacing than it had been during its original reign of terror. It seemed almost playful this time, offering cryptic messages and making predictions about the future. The witch claimed it would return again one day, though it gave no clear indication of when or why. After a short time, the voice disappeared once more, leaving the family in a state of unease. True to its word, the Bell Witch never fully faded from memory. Even though the farm grew quiet again and no further violent hauntings occurred, the legacy of the witch remained firmly entrenched in the town's history. Locals continued to speak of the Bell Witch in reverent tones, warning their children not to venture too close to the old Bell property after dark, for fear that the spirit might still be lingering, waiting for another chance to wreak havoc. The legend of the Bell Witch has endured for nearly 2 centuries, captivating the imagination of those who hear it. Skeptics have tried to explain away the events as superstition or mass hysteria, while believers hold fast to the notion that something truly supernatural took place on the Bell farm. The story has inspired countless books, articles, and even films, solidifying its place as one of America's most famous hauntings. To this day, visitors still come to Adams, Tennessee, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Bell Witch or to feel the lingering energy of the entity that once terrorized a family and captivated a nation. Whether they are true believers or merely curious thrill seekers, they all leave with a sense of unease, as if the witch's spirit still lingers in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment to return. For the Bell family, the memory of those years will never fade. The death of John Bell, the torment of Betsy, and the voice that haunted their every waking moment left a mark that time could never fully erase. Though the witch's physical presence may have waned, its legacy lives on, a chilling reminder of the power of the unknown and the horrors that sometimes lie just beyond the veil of the ordinary. In the heart of St. Louis, Missouri, during the late 1800s, the Lemp family stood as one of the most prominent and prosperous dynasties in the region. The family's name was synonymous with success, luxury, and innovation. Their pride and joy, the Lemp Brewery, had grown to be one of the largest and most influential breweries in America, setting them apart as leaders in the booming beer industry. The Lemp family's ascent to fortune seemed unstoppable, and at the height of their wealth, they built what would become their most lasting legacy, the Lemp Mansion. It was in 1868 that Johann Adam Lemp, the patriarch of the family, laid the foundations for the brewery that would revolutionize the production and distribution of lager beer in the United States. His innovative techniques for brewing and preserving beer catapulted the Lemp name into national fame, with their product becoming a staple in saloons and homes across the country. Lemp's vision was bold and unwavering. His brewery quickly expanded, and soon, the Lemp family reaped the rewards of his ingenuity. The Lemp Mansion itself was a testament to the family's immense success. Constructed in the early 1860s, this grand, stately home overlooked the bustling streets of St. Louis. It wasn't merely a house, but a symbol of power, wealth, and dominance. With its sprawling rooms, luxurious furnishings, and cutting-edge architecture for the time, the mansion was designed to host high society gatherings, grand parties, and exclusive business meetings. For years, the Lemp family lived a life of opulence and grandeur within its walls. At the helm of this empire was William J. Lemp, Johann's son, who took over the family business following his father's death. Under William's leadership, the brewery soared to even greater heights. The mansion, too, expanded, growing to include secret tunnels leading to the brewery, a horse stable, and a state-of-the-art auditorium. The Lemps were the envy of St. Louis, their name attached to every major event and charity in town. The mansion thrived as a hub of business and social life, but there was something else brewing within the family, a darker force that no amount of wealth could stop. Beneath the surface of their gilded lives, there were cracks beginning to form, small and unnoticed by the public. The family's growing wealth came with pressures and burdens that weighed heavily on its members. William Lemp's tireless work ethic, which had pushed the brewery to unprecedented success, had also taken a toll on him and those around him. While the family continued to host lavish parties and entertain prominent figures in their mansion, behind the closed doors of their private rooms, they struggled with inner turmoil. William Lemp Jr., William Sr.'s son, who would later take over the business, was often seen as the heir to this mighty empire. However, even as a young man, William Jr. wrestled with the weight of the family's expectations. While the mansion was filled with laughter and music during its many social events, William Jr. often found himself wandering the halls in solitude, caught between his father's shadow and his own insecurities. By the late 19th century, the Lemp Brewery had become one of the largest in the country, but with success came even more challenges. Competitors began to rise, and the beer market grew fiercer. William Jr. knew that to maintain their dominance, the Lemp family would need to adapt, but the weight of running the brewery had already taken a toll on him. Inside the grand Lemp mansion, the walls that had once echoed with joy and celebration now seemed to close in, with each family member feeling the strain of the life they led. It wasn't just business that caused the tension within the Lemp family. Their personal lives became more complex as well. Marriages were strained, and secrets began to seep into their once tightly knit circle. While the family presented an image of unity and strength to the world, cracks had begun to show, and those cracks, though small at first, would only widen with time. The mansion, once a symbol of their unshakable success, began to feel different. Some visitors reported feeling a strange unease within its walls, a coldness that hadn't been there before. Whispers of odd happenings in the mansion's many rooms began circulating among the household staff, and a heavy atmosphere seemed to settle over the home, though no one could quite place what was wrong. Despite the growing tensions, the Lemp family pressed on, maintaining their public image as best they could. The mansion continued to host extravagant parties, and the brewery, though facing more competition, remained a powerful force in the industry. Yet behind the scenes, the weight of the family's struggles, both personal and professional, was becoming harder to bear. The mansion, with its sprawling rooms and hidden corridors, seemed to take on a life of its own. Some believed that the mansion was beginning to reflect the family's inner turmoil. The servants whispered among themselves about seeing shadows that moved when no one was there, or hearing strange noises late at night. The atmosphere within the mansion grew darker, though outwardly the family remained as poised and powerful as ever. As the new century approached, the world around the Lemp family was changing, and so were they. The mansion, once the site of so much joy and celebration, had become a place of sorrow and secrets. Even those closest to the family could sense that something was amiss. though no one could quite explain it. For now, the Lemp family continued to hold on to their empire, and the mansion remained a symbol of their wealth and success. But beneath the surface, the cracks were widening, and it would not be long before the weight of their struggles became too much to bear. As the 20th century dawned, the Lemp family's fortune seemed more precarious than ever. Inside the mansion that had once symbolized their power and prestige, tensions simmered and began to surface. It was no longer just the brewing industry's growing competition that troubled the family. Personal struggles and unresolved conflicts weighed heavily on each of its members, causing fractures that would soon become irreparable. William Lemp Sr., who had inherited the empire from his father, was no longer the vibrant and dynamic leader he had once been. Though the Lemp Brewery still operated with great success, William Sr. found himself increasingly burdened by the pressures of running a business in an ever-changing landscape. The death of his beloved son, Frederick, had shattered his resolve and left him reeling. Frederick, once seen as the future of the Lemp legacy, had died unexpectedly, and the loss had struck the family like a thunderclap. The emptiness left behind could not be filled by business success, and the mansion, which had once bustled with activity, now echoed with silence and grief. Frederick's passing marked the beginning of the family's tragic decline. William Sr., devastated by the loss, began to retreat further into himself. His once sharp business acumen dulled, and the brewery, which had been the pride of the Lemp family, began to suffer from his lack of leadership. The weight of his sorrow was felt by everyone in the mansion, where even the grandest rooms seemed to dim under the strain of his melancholy. William Jr., who had always felt the shadow of his father looming over him, now found himself thrust into the position of leading the family business. But where his father had once commanded respect and authority, William Jr. struggled to keep the brewery afloat. The booming industry that had once elevated the Lemp family to greatness was now crowded with fierce competitors, and William Jr. lacked the motivation and vision to innovate. Instead, he sought solace elsewhere, distracting himself from the pressures of leadership with a lavish lifestyle that further distanced him from the responsibilities he was supposed to inherit. The grand parties that had once filled the mansion with life continued, but they no longer carried the same sense of celebration. William Jr., known for his extravagant tastes and indulgences, turned the mansion into a place of excess. Behind the walls of the once revered estate, he hosted opulent gatherings, where the city's elite would drink and socialize long into the night. But these parties were not enough to mask the growing tensions within the family. The once thriving brewery was now in danger, and with each passing year, William Jr.'s grip on the business and his life grew weaker. The family's financial struggles soon mirrored their emotional ones. The weight of Frederick's death lingered, affecting not just William Sr., but his wife and surviving children. Relationships strained, with arguments erupting over the smallest matters, and whispers of secrets began to spread through the mansion. The grandeur of the Lemp estate became a prison for its inhabitants, and the walls that had once sheltered them from the outside world now seemed to close in, trapping them in their own misery. The brewery, once a symbol of progress and innovation, fell victim to poor management and bad investments. Prohibition was on the horizon, and the looming threat of a nationwide ban on alcohol only added to the family's anxiety. For a family that had built its legacy on the sale of beer, the future appeared bleak. As competition stiffened and the family's fortune dwindled, the Lemps faced the terrifying reality that their empire was crumbling. William Sr.'s health, both physical and mental, began to deteriorate. His once commanding presence in the mansion faded, and soon he was seen less frequently by the staff and family. The vibrant man who had built the Lemp dynasty from the ground up was now a shadow of his former self, withdrawing into the privacy of his mansion's hidden corridors. He spent his days secluded in his private quarters, rarely interacting with the outside world. and his decline cast a long shadow over the rest of the family. The mansion itself began to take on a different aura, one that reflected the inner turmoil of its residents. The once pristine halls felt darker, colder, as though the very air had thickened with sorrow. Servants who had once been proud to work in the prestigious lamp all now whispered among themselves about strange happenings in the night footsteps where no one walked. Voices in empty rooms and an unsettling sense of being watched. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the mansion itself had absorbed the grief and despair of its inhabitants. As William Sr.'s isolation deepened, his son, William Jr., attempted to keep the brewery afloat, but the pressure was too much for him. He too began to unravel. His personal life, already marked by indulgence and excess, spiraled out of control. The strain of running a failing business, coupled with the family's mounting emotional burdens, became more than he could handle. Though he continued to host parties and maintain appearances, those closest to him could see that the weight of the Lemp legacy was crushing him. The Lemp mansion, once a symbol of the family's success and prosperity, now stood as a haunting reminder of what had been lost. The walls that had witnessed their rise to power now bore silent witness to their fall. It was no longer a home, but a relic of a fading dynasty, filled with memories that seemed to linger like ghosts in every room. And it was in those darkened halls, where grief, loss, and despair had taken root, that the first whispers of something more sinister began to surface. Visitors to the mansion, once eager to see the opulence of the Lemp estate, now reported feeling a heavy, oppressive presence as they walked through its rooms. Some spoke of hearing faint whispers, while others claimed to see fleeting shadows moving in the corners of their vision. The mansion that had once been alive with celebration was now eerily still, a place where the weight of the past could be felt in every corner. The Lemp family, once revered, had become a tragic tale whispered in St. Louis, a cautionary story of what happens when success turns to ruin. The mansion stood, a monument to their fall, and as the family's influence faded, the once glorious home became something else, entirely a place where memories of the past were not just remembered, but lived. The Lemp mansion, once a beacon of luxury and prosperity, now stood as a silent sentinel to the family's tragic history. After the passing of the last of the original Lemp heirs, the once vibrant home was largely abandoned, its grand rooms left to gather dust, the echoes of past laughter replaced by an eerie quiet. But it wasn't long before that quiet began to feel unnatural. Rumors of strange occurrences started to seep out from the few who remained near the mansion. At first, it was subtle, the sound of soft footsteps pacing through the empty halls, the occasional flicker of lights when no one was around, doors that seemed to close on their own. The mansion staff, those who had once served the Lemp family loyally, whispered among themselves about the unsettling events. But for a time, these occurrences were brushed aside as the natural creaks and groans of an old house. Yet, as the days turned into months, the phenomena became harder to ignore. The first major event occurred one stormy night. A caretaker, who had been hired to look after the mansion in its abandonment, was alone in the house when he heard the unmistakable sound of a piano playing. Startled, he made his way to the parlor, where the grand piano had been left untouched for years. As he entered the room, the music abruptly stopped, and he found the piano's lid wide open, keys still vibrating from the pressure of invisible fingers. He quickly left the room, convinced he had simply imagined it, but the next morning, the piano's keys were found pressed down in a strange, deliberate pattern, as though someone or something had been playing in the dead of night. Word spread quickly about the strange occurrences, and soon after, more reports began to emerge. Visitors to the mansion, including those drawn to its eerie history, would describe feeling an inexplicable chill as they stepped through the front doors. Some claimed to feel a sudden, overwhelming sadness, as though the very air inside the mansion was heavy with despair. But the most disturbing reports came from those who ventured into the basement, an area of the house that had long been associated with dark rumors. The basement of the Lemp mansion had always carried an air of mystery. During the height of the brewery's success, it had housed storage rooms and tunnels that connected the mansion to the brewery. But as the family's fortunes fell, so too did the use of these spaces, and they were largely abandoned. Those brave enough to explore the basement spoke of hearing disembodied whispers in the dark and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Several even claimed to see fleeting figures in the shadows, figures that would disappear the moment they were approached. One particularly unsettling encounter involved a group of paranormal enthusiasts who had been granted permission to investigate the mansion. They spent hours exploring the upper floors without incident, but as soon as they descended into the basement, their equipment began to malfunction. Cameras that had been working perfectly minutes earlier shut off unexpectedly, and their audio recorders picked up strange, low voices that none of them had heard at the time. One investigator, after standing alone in a corner for several minutes, suddenly felt a cold hand brush against her arm, though no one else was near her. Terrified, the group quickly left the basement, but when they reviewed their footage later, they discovered several seconds of static, followed by the faint sound of laughter that none of them could explain. The most disturbing part of the mansion, however, was not the basement or even the grand rooms upstairs. It was a small, unremarkable room tucked away on the second floor. This room, often referred to as the servants' quarters, was where many claimed to feel the strongest presence. Those who entered the room would often report feeling lightheaded or dizzy. On more than one occasion, visitors claimed they could hear the sound of someone weeping softly, though the room was empty. As more people visited the Lemp mansion, stories of hauntings began to pile up. Shadows that moved of their own accord, objects that disappeared and reappeared in different locations, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched became common experiences for those who spent time in the mansion. While some skeptics dismissed these stories as nothing more than overactive imaginations, others insisted that something unexplainable was happening within the walls of the mansion. Local paranormal investigators were soon drawn to the Lemp mansion, eager to uncover the truth behind the hauntings. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence came from an investigation conducted by a well-known ghost hunting team. After spending several nights in the mansion, they captured what appeared to be a figure standing at the end of a hallway. The figure was dressed in period clothing and seemed to vanish as the camera approached. The team, though seasoned in dealing with such phenomena, was stunned by the clarity of the apparition, and the footage quickly made its rounds through paranormal circles, cementing the mansion's reputation as one of the most haunted locations in America. But while investigators came and went, the strange happenings continued. Guests who stayed overnight in the mansion's converted bed and breakfast reported waking up to the sound of someone knocking on their door, only to find no one outside. Others described feeling pressure on the bed, as though someone had sat down beside them while they slept. The once grand home had become a place of restless spirits, unable or unwilling to leave the site of their past. Yet, for all the reports of ghostly encounters, there was one apparition that seemed to appear more frequently than any other. A man in a dark suit, often seen standing near the mansion's grand staircase. Those who saw him described a tall, imposing figure, his face obscured in shadow, who would disappear the moment anyone tried to approach. Some believed this to be the spirit of William Lemp Sr., forever tied to the home that had both made and destroyed his family. As the hauntings grew in frequency, the legend of the Lemp Mansion spread far beyond the borders of St. Louis. It became a destination for those fascinated by the paranormal, a place where people went not just to learn about the Lemp family's tragic history, but to experience the otherworldly for themselves. And though many left the mansion with stories of strange occurrences, Few could explain what was truly happening within its walls. The mansion had become more than just a relic of the past. It had become a living embodiment of the family's legacy, haunted not only by the spirits of those who once lived there, but by the weight of their history. The Lemp family may have fallen, but their presence in the mansion remained, lingering in the shadows, waiting for the next person to stumble upon their story. With stories of eerie encounters and strange happenings surrounding the Lemp mansion, it wasn't long before paranormal investigators and curious skeptics flocked to the grand old house. What began as whispered rumors among locals had become a national sensation, and those with a thirst for the supernatural sought to uncover the truth behind the hauntings. One of the first major investigations into the Lemp mansion was conducted by a renowned team of paranormal experts. Equipped with state-of-the-art technology, they set out to capture evidence of the spirits said to roam the mansion's halls. Cameras were set up in every room, voice recorders placed in dark corners, and infrared sensors lined the hallways in an attempt to detect anything out of the ordinary. For the investigators, the goal was not just to prove the mansion was haunted, but to make contact with whatever or whoever was still there. On the first night of the investigation, the team gathered in the mansion's parlor. They sat in silence as the house creaked around them, the soft hum of their recording devices filling the stillness. After several hours of waiting, one of the investigators reported hearing a faint voice from the direction of the staircase. The team scrambled to check their equipment, and sure enough, the audio recorder had picked up what sounded like a soft whisper, a voice that seemed to say, "Why are you here?" Encouraged by this small piece of evidence, the team pressed on, moving room by room throughout the mansion. The second-floor bedroom, where guests had frequently reported the sensation of someone sitting on the bed, was of particular interest. As they set up their equipment, the air in the room grew noticeably colder. One of the investigators, who was sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, suddenly felt the mattress depress beside her, as though someone had sat down. She froze, glancing around at her team, but no one else had moved. What was that? She whispered, her voice shaking slightly. The others watched as a faint imprint remained in the mattress, visible even after she stood up. Cameras caught the entire event, and though they had no explanation for what had caused it, the team could not deny the experience was real. As the night wore on, the team continued to document strange occurrences. Footsteps were heard in the hallways, but when they rushed to check, no one was there. The motion sensors in the basement were triggered repeatedly, though the cameras showed only empty corridors. And in the servants' quarters, one investigator felt a sudden chill and described feeling a presence standing directly behind him. Though when he turned, the room was empty. The basement, long considered one of the most unsettling parts of the mansion, proved to be a hotbed of activity. As they ventured into its depths, the investigators couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Several of them reported hearing low voices echoing through the narrow tunnels that once connected the mansion to the brewery. One particularly brave investigator stood alone in the basement for several minutes, only to hear what he described as the sound of heavy breathing coming from the far end of the room. When he called out, asking if anyone was there, the breathing stopped, but the sense of being watched lingered. The team returned to the mansion for several nights, hoping to gather more evidence. Each night, the activity seemed to increase. Disembodied voices, cold spots, and objects moving on their own became almost routine. But the most shocking moment came on their final night, when they attempted to make direct contact with the spirits through a series of questions. Using a device designed to pick up electromagnetic frequencies, the investigators asked if anyone was present and invited the spirit to make itself known. For several long moments, there was silence. Then, without warning, the device spiked, its lights flashing brightly as the needle jumped. The team looked at one another, excitement mixed with a growing sense of unease. They asked another question. "Are you one of the Lemp family?" The device remained still for a moment, then spiked again. The team pressed on, asking if the spirit had a message for them. This time, instead of a response from their equipment, they all heard a distinct knock coming from the far wall. They rushed to investigate, but once again, they found no one there. As word of these investigations spread, more and more paranormal enthusiasts descended on the Lemp Mansion, each hoping to capture their own piece of evidence. Some brought cutting-edge equipment, while others relied on nothing more than their instincts. Time and time again, those who entered the mansion came away with similar stories, strange noises, cold spots, and the overwhelming sense that they were not alone. One particularly striking piece of evidence came from a solo investigator who spent a night in the mansion's infamous second-floor bedroom. Armed with only a camera and a digital recorder, she sat on the edge of the bed, asking questions to the empty room. For hours, nothing happened. But as she reviewed the footage later, she noticed something chilling, what appeared to be a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, just out of focus. The figure didn't move, but it was clearly there, watching. Despite these numerous accounts, the most famous apparition tied to the Lemp Mansion remained the mysterious figure near the grand staircase. Several investigators and guests alike claimed to see him tall, dressed in a dark suit and standing still at the top of the stairs as though waiting for someone. Yet when approached, he would vanish. Some believed this to be the spirit of William Lemp Sr., tied forever to the mansion where his legacy had crumbled. As more and more evidence of the supernatural piled up, the Lemp Mansion's reputation as a haunted hotspot was cemented. It became not only a destination for paranormal investigators, but also for those simply curious about the house's dark history. Tours were offered, allowing visitors to walk through the mansion's eerie halls, and those brave enough could even stay the night, though few ever left without their own stories of strange encounters. Despite all the investigations, all the footage, and all the personal experiences, one question remained unanswered. Why were the spirits still there? Was it the tragic history of the Lemp family that bound them to the house, unable to move on? Or was the mansion itself, with its hidden rooms and dark corners, a beacon for the supernatural, drawing spirits from beyond? No one could say for certain, but those who stepped inside the mansion knew one thing: they were never truly alone. The Lemp Mansion, now infamous for its haunted history, had transformed into something far beyond a once grand family estate. Over the years, as more investigators, tourists, and thrill-seekers visited its halls, the mansion took on a new life as a paranormal landmark. It became a place where the past and the present seemed to intersect, where the line between history and the supernatural blurred, and where visitors came not only to witness its architecture, but to experience the inexplicable. In the years following the countless investigations and ghost hunts, the mansion's reputation as one of the most haunted places in America continued to grow. People from all over the country, and even the world, sought out the mansion, driven by a desire to connect with the spirits said to linger within its walls. Stories of ghost sightings, cold spots, strange noises, and objects moving on their own became almost commonplace, but they never lost their grip on the public's imagination. As the mansion's fame grew, so too did the fascination with the Lemp family itself. The tragic rise and fall of the Lemp dynasty became a central piece of American folklore, with the family's history serving as a cautionary tale of how great success can lead to immense suffering. Documentaries, books, and articles chronicling the family's story were produced, each one exploring the complex lives of the Lemps and the events that had ultimately led to the mansion's haunted reputation. Yet, for all the stories of paranormal activity, there was also a deep sense of sadness that seemed to linger over the house. Visitors often remarked that while the mansion was undoubtedly haunted, the spirits that resided there didn't feel malicious. Instead, many felt that the entities were lost or stuck, trapped in the home they had once cherished, but were now unable to leave. The tragedy of the Lemp family's downfall seemed to hang in the air, and many believed that the hauntings were not so much a sign of anger or resentment, but of unresolved pain. As the mansion became a popular attraction, it was also converted into a bed and breakfast, allowing guests to stay overnight and experience the house's eerie atmosphere for themselves. Those who spent the night often left with stories of strange occurrences, footsteps pacing in the hallways, the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of their bed, or the feeling of being watched while standing in front of the grand staircase. Some even claimed to have seen the now famous figure at the top of the stairs, a man in the dark suit, thought to be William Lemp Sr., keeping watch over the home he had once ruled. For many, staying at the Lemp mansion was an opportunity to confront the unknown. But while some arrived in hopes of a supernatural encounter, others were drawn by a different kind of curiosity, the desire to understand the complex legacy of the Lemp family. The mansion, in many ways, had become a monument to their history, a living museum where guests could walk through the very rooms that had once housed some of the most influential people in St. Louis. The grand dining room, the elegant parlors, the servants' quarters, each space was filled with artifacts of the past, reminding visitors of the lives that had been lived and lost within those walls. Though the mansion had undergone renovations over the years to accommodate guests, great care was taken to preserve its historical integrity. The rooms were restored to reflect the time when the Lemps had lived there, giving visitors a glimpse into the opulence of their world. Yet, even with these efforts, the house maintained its unsettling aura. The weight of the past was ever present, and guests often reported feeling an inexplicable sadness, as though the walls themselves remembered the pain that had been endured within them. As the Lemp mansion became more integrated into local and national culture, it also became a part of St. Louis folklore. Locals, who had grown up hearing stories of the mansion's haunted past, often shared their own experiences, adding to the growing list of supernatural events associated with the house. Some believed that the hauntings were tied to specific members of the Lemp family, while others thought that the house itself had become a kind of portal, attracting spirits from beyond. The mansion's presence in popular culture was cemented when it became the subject of numerous television shows and paranormal documentaries. Each program delved into the house's rich history, exploring both the family's tragic legacy and the mysterious events that continued to occur there. For many, these shows were the first glimpse into the world of the Lemp mansion, and they helped fuel a new wave of interest in the house, bringing even more visitors to its doors. Despite its transformation into a tourist destination, the Lemp mansion never lost its sense of mystery. Even those who had spent years studying the house, whether as historians, paranormal investigators, or curious visitors, agreed that there was something about the mansion that defied explanation. The stories of ghostly encounters and strange happenings were consistent, yet elusive, leaving more questions than answers. The spirits, it seemed, were content to remain just out of reach, revealing themselves only in fleeting moments. Over time, the mansion became a symbol not just of the Lemp family's downfall, but of the enduring presence of the past. It was a place where history refused to stay buried, where the echoes of old tragedies continued to resonate. For many, this was the true legacy of the Lemp mansion, a reminder that even in the face of immense success, there can be deep and lasting sorrow. Yet, despite the house's haunted reputation, the Lemp mansion remained a place where people sought connection. Whether it was with the spirits that roamed its halls or with the history that shaped its walls, visitors continued to come year after year, drawn by the inexplicable pull of the mansion. Some came for the thrill of a supernatural encounter, while others came to pay their respects to a family whose story had become legend. In the end, the Lemp mansion was more than just a haunted house. It was a living testament to the resilience of memory, a place where the past refused to fade. And for those who walked through its doors, It was a reminder that the line between this world and the next might be thinner than we think. As visitors continue to flock to the Lemp Mansion, they do so with the knowledge that they are stepping into a space that holds more than just history. The spirits of the Lemp family may still linger, but their presence is not one of fear, it is one of remembrance. The mansion, in all its haunted glory, stands as a bridge between the past and the present, a place where the story is never truly over.